This episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com and the StarCityGames.com weekly sale. This week, we've got one on the fancier side. Save 15% on all played or heavily played foils at StarCityGames.com/sale. That's SALE. We all know these are going right in your commander deck, and you're going to be shuffling them up for a while. So save some already on their condition, and then save another 15% more with this week's StarCityGames.com weekly sale.
What's up, everyone? Justin Parnell here,
along with Ryan Overturf, and we want to tell you about the single best podcast on the SCG network.
Well, obviously, Ryan, you're talking about the 540.
Indeed I am, and that is the best podcast because we talk about the best format in the history of Magic.
Cube Draft?
Cube Draft.
Every week we go over all things Cube.
We're talking about in-depth reviews of brand new cards.
The best ways to draft and think about Arena and Magic Online Cube formats,
as well as ways to play with your friends
and ways to play with your enemies.
Also some ways to make your friends into your enemies.
And cardboard takes of a variety of temperatures.
So if you're a fan of structured nonsense,
or if you hate it,
either way, all the same, check out the 540 every week wherever you find your podcasts and right here on StarCityGames.com.
This week's Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, the #1 store for Magic the Gathering inspired apparel. Take a look at their t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and just general stylings at coalesceapparel.shop. Then use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your entire order. And seriously, I want to emphasize that sticker part. Shirts are cool, but you can send a targeted message with the sticker. Slap it on your deck box if it matches your commander, or if you really want to get inventive, find a way to slap the 3x4 sticker on your 2.5x3.5 Magic card, maybe with a sleeve, maybe with a hard case. You're inventive people. You'll find a way to make it work. So take a look at coalesceapparel.shop, check out their product lines like Wooburg Forever and Ravnica University, and see what catches your eye. Remember, use gift code SCG at checkout to save 10%. Coalesce Apparel and Design. No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Hello everyone and welcome to Dominaria's Judgment, which is still a weekly modern podcast hosted by StarCityGames.com. But this is a very special episode because the week in question today is the first week of September 2011. We are going back in time for the 10th anniversary of Pro Tour Philadelphia, the first of many modern Pro Tours, and also taking a look at the birth of modern as a format. So the way this works is Ari and I have compiled an oral history of the event and of the early days of modern, which has a written portion that you can find on the select side over at StarCityGames.com, not behind a paywall or anything. You can sink your teeth into that right now. And that will also contain the full transcripts of the interviews that you're about to hear at the end there, if you prefer to digest them that way, with some added content that had to be cut from the audio part for time. And then this podcast and the other episode going up along with it will contain those interviews. We have a truly star-studded cast here, including the creators and cultivators of modern in those early days, Zach Hill, Tom Lapilli, Gavin Verhey. We speak to the three of them in part 2. Here in part 1, we have members of that top 8 in our own Sam Black and Josh Utter-Leyton, as well as one of Josh's friends and well-wishers, the great Scott-Vargas. We speak to Josh Hakakian, whose name you may not know, but that's because his amazing run and underdog story ended just a little bit too soon. We speak to Brian David Marshall, the Pro Tour historian. And finally, we talk to the star of Walking the Plains, Nathan Holt, who was not playing in that Pro Tour himself, but in one sense, he may be the biggest winner of them all from that weekend. It's a fantastic group of people with a wide range of perspectives on the weekend. It was truly a joy for me to talk to all of them. You can tell they had fun reminiscing, and hopefully you all have fun listening. Let's get started. Now, there is one name I left off that list earlier. It would not be an episode of this podcast without its namesake, Ari Lax. He was in this event, kicking off a 10-year engagement with a modern format that continues to this day. Let's hear from the man himself.
And to kick all of this off, I'm joined by, of course, Ari Lax, who back in the day was a young whippersnapper who had not had the same degree of Pro Tour success yet. So where were you in your Magic career back in those summer days of 2011?
So that was actually my 10th Pro Tour, I think, give or take. I had qualified first for Kyoto in 2009 and just kind of chained off from there. And so that was late 2011. So yeah, I was kind of just like grinding out some golds, had, good finish, couple Grand Prix top 8s, that kind of stuff. And, this was, late in the season and kind of a spot where it's like, I didn't need like an insane finish, but like, good finish would be great. So yeah, we got, cracking early on testing for that Pro Tour. This was before they announced it was modern. It was as bad as everyone else has implied. The short version is that we tested about 10 decks. And the conclusion was you should be playing Stoneforge Mystic with Splinter Twin or Stoneforge Mystic with Scapeship Valakut. And it was bad. It was just bad.
What would you ballpark the number of decks that would have had Stoneforge Mystic in the tournament if the format hadn't changed before then?
It was a bit of a different era, so I think like probably 40% is the cap. I don't think we ever saw higher than that. I think that the like Oko whole like almost hitting 70% or whatever, I don't think that could have happened in that era, but I think pretty clean 40%, maybe 50%.
Yeah, I think part of the Oko thing was that was just so impossible to ignore, that why would you do anything else? But part of it too is just living in a different information era, right? So, as someone who I know really cares about the process that goes into preparation and a lot of the surrounding factors that come into play on that, what would you say were the crucial differences that people need to understand about what it was like preparing for a tournament back then compared to today?
I think a lot of people, especially that was like the last year before everything really changed. I think it was a lot less of like a formalized process. There was also some issues revolving around like Magic Online release dates and set release dates. So I remember like, I think it was the year before, Pro Tour San Diego was close enough to the World release that like, I don't remember if you could draft before the Pro Tour on Magic Online, or like they may have literally been like you had 2 days of drafting. There's just like a lot more logistical things. People just kind of like rolled with it, showed up, played a deck, did fine or not fine. I don't have a good idea of exactly why that was. I mean, there was this, it was just a different era of like the super teams were just starting back up around then. I mean, like Channel Fireball had their whole Callblade thing that year, but like that was 2 Pro Tours before this one, and people still really were kind of, journaling around in the post-poker era.
So from your standpoint, you hear that the format's going to be modern instead of extended. You're happy that it's not going to be extended anymore, presumably. But what were your expectations for modern? Was this exciting that you had this brand new format with no real defined parameters yet?
Yeah, I think to rewind to what extended was before, where it was like the 4 years worth of blocks, but even before that, where it was like 7, there was like this critical turning point where I think it was specifically to me, like when the Ravnica's Shocklands rotated, where the format just felt like kind of meh. And like that was like the key thing that I think really sealed the deal on that format, was just like the power level just dropped so much. You couldn't get people excited in it because it was just like the same old standard cards. Yeah, it was not great. And this was all compounding off the fact that the end of like the longer extended was this whole like Dark Depths, Hex Mage, Thopter Foundry, Sword of the Meek stuff that was, I think, what even turned them on to the idea of cutting extended down, or really even started the process of removing it. And like being able to go back to extended with like a potential fresh ban list, because bannings were a lot more, they weren't the kind of thing where like you would wake up on a Tuesday and it would be after lunch and then like 3 cards would be banned. There were like set dates, and they really didn't ban stuff that much. So like, it kind of gave them a chance to like wipe the slate clean and say, we're going to do this without, the thing we've heard from everyone else, or I guess we'll hear depending on where this goes in, is, this idea of being able to start fresh without having to battle against the same things that people were losing to before, which is why if you look at the original modern ban list, Stoneforge Mystic's on it, Sword of the Meek is on it, Dark Depths is on it, Jace the Mind Sculptor. A lot of these cards are still there. A lot of them aren't, but they're all things that were like known issues that they just didn't want people to start with.
Yeah, even stuff like Ancestral Vision, right? It's a lot of cards which were kind of creeping close to the line in recent 4-year extended formats, and they just didn't want to have this new format be a repeat of things that people had just got tired of.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember the testing process. I think that when we started with that, we kind of started with the premise that Wild Nicodle was legal. Specifically, the Michigan people I was testing with at the time up in Ann Arbor were Kyle Dembinski. I don't know if a name that people would recognize a ton these days, but he won a Versus System Pro Circuit back in the day. And Matt McCullough, a player who ended up finishing also in like the top 50 of this event. That was like the Ann Arbor crew, and Brian DeMars, a name probably people are more familiar with these days. So we were doing some testing, and Kyle had kind of played a bunch of Wild Nicodle for the last few extended seasons. So I think that's kind of where we started. And we just kept trying to build things that would battle against that. I know we, tried Splinter Twin a bit. We knew Affinity would be a thing. We didn't think that either of those were that great against the sort of Naya decks. And then the progression was the Cloud Post deck kind of got figured out. This was the like Primeval Titan, Cloud Post, Eye of Ugin, Emrakul, Green Sun, Zenith, Dryad Arbor kind of pile. And that was basically unwinnable for Wild Nicodle. Just the difference between, like, if you think about these ramp decks getting overrun by aggro, it's way different when you're like also have Glimmer Post that gains you 1,000,000 life. And it was just a fiasco.
Yeah, and so we do see Wild Nicodle making the finals of the Pro Tour in the hands of Josh Utter-Leyton and the CFB Super Team. Their approach was to pair some of the blue cards, which were fairly free to play in your Fetchland, Shockland mana base with Noble Hierarch. You had stuff like Flash Freeze and Mana Leak and so on, as well as some more permanent base disruption like Aven Mind Sensor, Gadok Teak, stuff like that. You guys took a very different approach.
Yeah, so we tried the counterspell approach up front, and we kind of came to the conclusion that if you were on the draw, you ended up in too many spots where, like, you just couldn't apply enough pressure against them taking normal game actions if you left up counter magic. Like, you'd often get like turn 3 Titans off of their Dryad Arbor. Like, the hands where they're just like Green Sun Zenith, Dryad Arbor, Cloud Post, like Sack Elder, that was it. Like, they just had mana the next turn if they played a Glimmer Post. So from there, I think we kind of went down this road of actually attacking their mana. And a bit before the Pro Tour, we had like this Lotus Cobra Boom Bust deck. And then over the next week, I think independently, I know DeMars had split off the test with Matt Sperling and Patrick Chapin. I was testing with Kyle and Matt. And we all we came down to like similar conclusions on both sides and kind of hooked back up at the end to like share a bit of insight. We ended up playing this like Kabu Predator Oust Fiery Justice deck with like Oust being this key player attacking Dryad Arbors that were Green Sun Zenith for, being able to like flip Primeval Titan. And I think the only way to describe this deck is like every single turn you searched your library like 3 times because you had Zenith, Fetch Lands, and Knight of the Reliquary. And you had to make like exact precise choices to like negate the fact that your opponent was making +2 actions every turn of like producing a land or doing something. And like every single turn you would just end up narrowly ahead and then somehow win. It was a lot. It is one of the most difficult decks I think I've had to play at a major tournament.
We should recite the text on Kabu Predator quickly for the people who, were not playing over a decade ago, because I think that's the last time I really saw that card do its thing. So this is 1 and a green for a 2/2 trample, so not too impressive so far. But whenever an opponent gains life, you put that many counters on Kabu Predator. And these days, I think that would be you put a +1/+1 counter on it, regardless of how much life they gain. But this was just, you got it all. So your opponent played a Glimmer Post and gained 4 life. You now had a 6/6 Kabu Predator. And in your deck that had Growth of the Bone Willows and Punishing Fire, which was one of these stifling combos from previous extended formats, which I'm actually a little surprised they didn't axe in advance, as well as Fiery Justice. This is 3 mana, just Naya mana. You deal 5 damage as you choose between any number of targets, and the opponent gains 5 life, which normally in an aggro deck, a pretty significant drawback. In this deck, this is the twin to your Splinter for your Kabu Predator. You just balloon that to gigantic proportions. So you had this quite finicky, aggressive leading mid-range deck, but with these like wild Splinter String combos out of nowhere spliced into it as well.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate description of what it was kind of doing. And like you also had like the weird hate card toolbox of like being able to green Sun Zenith for Gaddock Teague. I know the Mars contingent ended up with Arena in their deck, which was really good. And, yeah, literal actual card Arena. It's a land, it doesn't tap for mana. It has 3 tap. Each player taps a creature of their choice they control, and then those creatures fight. It was basically impossible for Splinter Twin to get around it. It's just kind of like Seal of Doom repeatedly for that matchup, and you could just like leave your knight up to get it at any point in time. But yeah, we played this deck. I think exactly 4 people played the deck at the tournament. I don't think it was good, but somehow the 4 people were me, Brian DeMars, Matt Sperling, and Drew Levin playing his first Pro Tour. And I think our results were like 15th, 35th, 37th, and 04 drop or something like that, which is just wild.
Not going to ask how those were distributed among those 4 team members, just to protect the innocent there. But yeah, it's and remember with the Arena thing, this is before open deck list. This is when you heard hushed whispers about who was playing what in their decks, and so no one had Arena on their radar unless they had discovered it themselves, and so they would go for their actual twin combo or their twin-esque Blazing Shoal combo or whatever it was, and you would activate your Knight of the Reliquary, which normally would not represent anything actually scary in that position, right? And then you would get Arena, and they would usually pick it up and read it, and their face would fall. And I know Michael Jacob, who not someone who usually emotes too much or gives too much away, in his report recalls he and Jerry Thompson had this Cloudpost deck with a bunch of stuff, including Arena in it, and so often they would meet between rounds and just cackle maniacally as one of them told the story of how yet another opponent had been bested in the Arena.
Yeah, the format was so big, I don't think anyone really explored the full depths of it. Like, I know, like, right before the Pro Tour, like the day before, when the site opens up and everyone's just kind of like crowding through, me, DeMars, and Kyle, we made an activity out of going up to all the dealers and flipping through their like 50-cent boxes. And then like coming back and we basically drafted the resulting pile of modern staples that were just like not cards that people wanted and not cards that people realized they wanted yet. And that was pretty fun. That was a good Thursday activity.
Were there any interesting finds in there?
I know we each walked away with like a playset of Through the Breach. Okay. Being like a super important card. I'm trying to remember like what other cards came out of that. Plow Under, which was more important at the time. Just like a lot of weird stuff that people like did not know that was a playable card. I think there were like Torpor Orbs, just like things that like, you know, now are like, oh yeah, this is very clearly like a card that matters in the context of Modern. Just like, you know, you show up to this Pro Tour, there's 8 years of past content, like, you know, someone else is going to figure it out for you. And like, then you'll sort through all your stuff. But for now, this is the box and someone else can figure it out.
Going back to that process that you described, many of the other people that we've spoken to took it as a given that there was something broken in this format, and usually the first place they started there was some kind of Steam Vents combo deck with Ponder and Preordain as this amazing card selection. It sounds like you guys, maybe because of that extended experience, started from the default position of, well, there's going to be some good Zoo deck, right? And that's going to be a defining pillar of the format, and then it'll kind of branch out from there.
So I think the critical thing was that we did not come up with a deck that was, we started with Zoo, and when we kept playing our combo decks against Zoo, we ran into this issue where none of them were consistent enough to actually defeat Zoo reliably, especially once the Zoo deck started integrating the counter spells, which is really what we saw in the finals. But I think that we didn't have the Blazing Shoal deck early on, and we didn't have I'm trying to remember if anyone has mentioned this, because this is one of the later things we're recording, but there was I think the actual best deck to come out of this event that no one really talks about was, I think the Australian showed up with a Empty the Warrens Goblin Bushwhacker Storm deck that was like turn 2.5 kills pretty reliably. We didn't have that deck. And our Storm decks were a lot more on the Grape Shot line, and those decks just couldn't really stand up to like the pressure of like Wild Nacatl into like whatever disruptive spells. It was just not good enough.
Yeah, there's When I was going back over the text coverage for the event, there's a feature match involving Jeremy Neiman, where the entire feature match just fits into a paragraph, basically, because it's, Jeremy went off on turn 2, and then the opponent maybe drew their hate card on the play in game 2, and then game 3, well, Jeremy just went off on turn 2 again. What did you expect?
Yeah, we did not have that deck, and we tried Splinter Twin. I know Matt actually played Splinter Twin at the event. And that was like the best thing from that group that we had against Zoo, but even then we didn't love the matchup. It was, I think, I'm trying to remember what the differences were. The Splinter Twin list he played was pretty similar, but it's just Splinter Twin. There's not a lot of nonsense you can pull there. It's, these are the cards. You have card A, card B, and then the good interaction. So I think that was kind of it. We didn't assume there was something broken. We tried the broken things. We just kind of assumed that Wild Nacatl was better. And it turned out we missed a little bit, but I don't think by a ton.
So as those constructed rounds are unfolding and maybe you play against some of the off-the-wall stuff yourself, or you see it in the room, you hear about it, was there anything where you're like, God damn it, we missed this one thing which would have changed our whole process? Or is it more that, oh, okay, that's a cool idea, but it doesn't really change our fundamental assumptions about the format?
I think that by the time you're sitting down with Knight of the Reliquary and Punishing Fire and Oust in your deck, you're making this assumption that it doesn't really matter what you missed, because if you missed big, it's whatever. I died on turn 2 to Hive Mind combo or something stupid. It was turn 3 killed by Hive Mind combo where I almost was able to pay for it, but not quite. When that happens, you're that is in fact the experience I have signed up for by playing these cards. So we kind of just put our heads down and tried to beat the Tarmogoyf mirrors, or I think I played against a Death Cloud deck at one point. That kind of nonsense.
Yeah, you got moderned, as people would become accustomed to saying over the years. And so in the aftermath of the event, where it is like the Wild West in some ways, but then also the format just rapidly iterates, and we have a ban list update, I think exactly 2 weeks afterwards. And the format starts to evolve into something recognizable. What was the takeaway from the first big modern event, from your standards as a player, but also with, the detached perspective that you're able to have? Did it seem like the event had been a success?
Oh, yeah. I remember in that 2 weeks, the local store was actually able to host a no updated bans modern event, and people showed up to play it. So that was kind of the starting point of the format. And in that kind of lull between this ban and then World and the Wild Nacatl ban, I played a little, but I know right after that I started playing a ton of the format, and it was very clear from day one that this was going to be a giant hit, even if I spent 3 months of my life playing, 15 matches of Affinity versus Splinter Twin a day. People still wanted to play that over and over, and you would play against Kitchen Finks or something else. People showed up with what they wanted, and I think that was kind of a part of the format's early success, was that it was kind of scrappy. I mean, again, like I said, Affinity and Splinter Twin were really good, but people felt like they could beat those decks because it's just a creature combo, or they can play Stony Silence. And even if they didn't, there was this idea that you could show up and you knew what to do, and then you could play literal Cawblade without the blades. I don't really remember. People were doing some weird stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, we're going to see you coming very close to the top 8 at the next Modern Pro Tour the following year, and then the Modern Pro Tour in and of itself will become an institution of sorts, and when it gets taken away for a year, people clamor to see it return. With 10 years of hindsight now, we're in here every week talking about the state of current Modern, and that's a lot of fun. But with that amount of hindsight now, does that change how you look back on those very early days of the format?
Not really. I think if anything, the important turning point, interesting. I've thought about how Modern, has been through a lot recently, but so is, basically every format. I think the turning point may have been not these Pro Tours kind of established it, but the Grand Prix grind that kind of popped up in the 2015 era of Modern, where you had Grand Prix and the SCG Tour and everything just firing every week. And I think that was what really kind of cemented the format it had this identity, back then of like possibility, but it feels like it really came into its own in those like mid to later, like those middle years, I guess. And this was kind of like just a really good baseline for that. This top 8 was a lot of stuff, and people kind of looked at it and were like, oh, you can do a lot of things. And I think that kind of led to the success of later Modern, where people had this willingness to keep playing their, broken but slightly sideways from the mainstream kind of things, like the Dredge versus the Hollow One kind of debates. I think that has been a consistent strong point of the format.
In closing here, are there any maybe fun anecdotes or memories from that first Modern Pro Tour, which maybe people don't need to hear, but they're certainly going to want to hear?
Yeah, this is a good one. So this is the head judge of this tournament is Riccardo Tessatori, Italian guy, and there was a bit of a fun minute with translation where he's making a ruling between two players. Basically, we don't need to get into like how the different trigger and warning rules were back then, but basically someone has been messing up a lot to the point of like they're having the like sit down talk with the judge of like, we need you to stop breaking game states. And it's at the table with the opponent. And Ricardo's, takes his time, pauses in sentences, thinks through his translations. And at one point in the ruling, he's like, listen, this is a game of Magic. I would like for you to win or lose based on the results of the game. And that pause between win and or lose, you could see the reaction of like the opponent being like, did you just say you would like my opponent to win this game? So yeah, that was a fun one.
There were, as I recall, some interesting judge calls to be had from that event. So I'm sure if that may actually be the missing link in this whole project. I think we did a fairly comprehensive job, but if we had a sit down with Riccardo Tessatori, that might be the cherry on top there. Yeah.
I think that event, a lot of people had to read some cardboard. It was, we talk about, you're talking about players like learning things about their opponent's deck. I think there was a learning curve with your own deck repeatedly across this event because the format was so new. People were just doing stupid stuff left and right, and it resulted in some comical matches.
So that's the other host of this here show, and we'll be back with some very special guests after a short break here. Don't go anywhere.
If you are looking to sell your Magic the Gathering cards, it's never been easier than heading over to starcitygames.com/sell. With a 30% store credit bonus and a fast turnaround time, there's no reason to sell to anyone else. Enjoy 4 convenient ways to sell your cards. Check out our buy list for specific cards, ship your cards on over with the ship and sell program. You can come on into the Star City Games Comics and Game Store in Roanoke, Virginia. And if you have over 500,000 cards or own a store and want to move some of your bulk out, we can come to you. Go to starcitygames.com/sell, that's SELL, to get the details on the best way to sell your Magic the Gathering cards.
Welcome back, and to kick off this run of guests, it's someone who did not torpede this Pro Tour, but torpedoed basically every other one, as far as I can tell. It's the one and only Scott-Vargas. And we're joined now by Scott-Vargas, who, among many other accolades over the years, may be at least tied for the literal first person to ever play a game of Modern. Does that sound right?
Yeah, so when they announced Modern as a format, the first time it was going to be unveiled was actually at the Community Cup in 2011, and I was on the Community Cup team.
Yeah, so this is a somewhat obscure event for the Modern listener, maybe, but give us a quick introduction to what this event was and how Modern came to be a part of that.
So the Community Cup was an event that ran, I think, 4 or 5 years before they ended up moving on from it, where it was a team of, I think, 8 people from the, Magic Online community, whether that was people who streamed the game or made content, people who, there were some people who, moderated different chat rooms about Magic Online or were involved in other ways. But basically, it was a bunch of folks who were on the playing side. It was myself, Marshall Sutcliffe, Bing Luke, I think I know Ari knows him, Michelle Roberson, let's see, and a couple other folks. So 8 total. And we were going to play against Wizards, the Magic Online team, in a variety of formats, one of which was Unified Modern. We had to build 8 Modern decks that had to all be legal if you stacked them on top of each other.
So already this is a different challenge from what was going to be the testing process for the Modern Pro Tour. And this is with an earlier prototype of Modern where, some of the stuff deemed too absurd even for that first Modern Pro Tour was still let loose.
There was, I can't remember if there was either no ban list or a very small ban list, but coming into the format, it was completely wide open. You could play with Hypergenesis, Glimpse of Nature. You could play with Jace, Stoneforge Mystic. Bitter Blossom, funnily enough, is a card that at some point was actually banned in Modern, as unbelievable as that might seem now. And a bunch of other things where the whole format was our playground, and we got to build decks with a lot of these wild cards.
Take us through what the mentality was like coming into what was going to be this first Modern Pro Tour here, where this was queued up to be an extended Pro Tour after the rotation, and even though you'd had quite a lot of success in extended yourself, did this seem like a change that was necessary or one that you were excited about?
Our overall feeling, my team, it was a Team Channel Fireball, as we were all testing, and this is back when we did the rent a place for 2 weeks. Actually, we rented an off-season ski resort. It was a kind of weird abandoned town in the mountains, in Pennsylvania. But we were ready to put a lot of work into it, and we were generally pretty excited. I don't think we felt there had to be a new format exactly, but on the other hand, I don't think anyone was particularly unhappy, because I don't know, new formats are always fun to try out. And even after the Community Cup, because a bunch of cards got banned in the wake of that, like a bunch of the ones I mentioned, the format was pretty open. There's a lot of different things going on.
And this was about the time where, not that any of you have slowed down since then, but I think it's fair to say this is a time when you individually and CFB as a team were really at the height of your powers. And so did it feel like with this new challenge that everyone in that Pro Tour had to face, that you would be almost uniquely well equipped to handle that?
I don't know if that's a uniquely, because there's always been a lot of talented players who play at every Pro Tour, but we were definitely near our peak in terms of ability to prepare, desire to prepare, and kind of fire. I think 2011 in some senses was probably my best year of competition, and we definitely put a lot of work into the format, with actually one glaring exception. We were too lazy to put a Splinter Twin deck together. Just no real reason. We just at some point no one ever did it, and it was our deck's going to be fine against Twin. We've got a bunch of Path to Exiles.
And in those early rounds, as you start to see what's going on the tables around you, you hear back from your teammates what they played against. Did it feel like you had, with the exception possibly of Splinter Twin, did it feel like you had kind of mapped out the contours of the format in a rough sense?
We were happy with where our deck landed, because we had a couple assumptions going in. One is that the Cloudpost deck was a deck we really wanted to beat, and the combination of cheap creatures plus Unified Will and Negate was good against them. We had a good matchup there. Cloudpost, if I recall correctly, underperformed in that tournament, but I could be wrong. And then we actually had a fine Splinter Twin matchup. I ended up beating it. A bunch of people in the tournament beat it. Josh Utter-Leyton, of course, did lose in the finals to it, but for the most part, we were happy with that matchup. And then because Cloudpost was good, we kind of expected it to push out a lot of the controller mid-range decks that you'd face. And it turns out Green Sun Zenith's a really good card against aggro, where you were able to reliably have a Tarmogoyf for Knight of the Reliquary in play against maybe these Goblin Guide style of decks.
And meanwhile, against combo, right, you can search for Gaddock Teague, you can search for whatever the silver bullet happens to be for that situation.
Yeah, and we, of course, had those sideboard counterspells, which were great in the combo matchups, too.
What about Bant Charm? I know that one has seen play over the years, but, that ended up in your deck for what's kind of the most broken historically Modern Pro Tour. That card was pretty good those days, right?
Yeah, Bant Charm had this nice combination of being a removal spell or a counterspell. And it just kind of played into what the deck wanted to do, because this wasn't a, super fast low to the ground aggro deck. Did have Wild Nacatl in it. There's the cat. But playing a creature or two and then just leaving up Bant Charm, really thanks to Noble Hierarch and Green Sun Zenith, both of which acted as mana accelerants, we got to play a little higher curve than a more typical aggro deck.
And so as the tournament unfolds, you're getting into the later rounds of day two. Josh, of course, breaks into the top 8 there. What was the verdict in terms of how well your preparation had translated into results there for the team?
We had good results. I don't remember where everyone finished. I went 9-1 in constructed and, was really weighed down by one of the worst drafts I've ever done of all time. It was a draft that was covered, so you could still, I think, find the draft viewer, but for years you could. And Ben Stark would routinely pull up this draft as a way to, I want to say learn from it, but mostly make fun of me and Conley, both of whom drafted atrociously. So I can't really blame the deck on that. Overall, we had a solid constructed finish, kind of as we did those days, and I think our deck was good. It turns out you get, 14 talented Magic players in the same house, and you test for 2 weeks. Even if you don't build a Splinter Twin deck, you're still going to end up on a pretty good deck most of the time.
Out of curiosity, was this the corrupt draft? Or was that different drafts?
Not corrupt, Consume Spirit, but yes. It was a draft where I took the 4th best black card and 6th best card out of a very strong pack that also was a mono black card, because for whatever reason I was kind of obsessed with forcing mono black. Not a smart strategy for multiple reasons.
Yeah, we haven't dwelled too much on M12 Limited in this process so far, and increasingly I'm discovering reasons for that. Yeah, but once Josh has clinched that top 8, what goes into that process of helping him prepare for those Sunday matches?
Well, we got together, and the way our team typically did things, and I can't speak to other teams, is the person who made top 8, or people in some cases, after we make top 8 and you treat your team to dinner and you do all that, usually those people actually just wanted to go to bed. And part of the strength of having a team is they get to go to bed with the rest of the team, the people who aren't playing on Sunday, who don't have to get up early, because they always made every single person in the top 8 get there at 8 a.m. when you weren't playing till noon. I don't know, just one of those weird things they do. But Josh went to bed, if I recall, and we just had a bunch of folks staying up testing his potential matchups. You focus usually on the quarterfinals matchup, and then semis, you look at the 2 possible decks he could play, and if one of them is particularly interesting to test against, we would. And you usually don't bother trying to figure out what the finals could be, because that could be 4 different decks, so not really productive to test against all of them. But we'd also put in so many hours before the tournament that we weren't particularly worried. I don't recall discovering anything new or groundbreaking. We certainly didn't discover that it was better to go second. We chose to go first.
Well, let's talk about that semifinals matchup then, because I think this is the match above all others that is the one that gets remembered from this tournament, and for many different reasons there. And so when we talk to Josh, I imagine he'll have his own insight on this. But when you hear Sam announce that he's choosing to draw, and that this is already a matchup which this deck is the story of the tournament in some ways. The whole idea of people dying left and right to turn 2 to Blazing Shoal is one of the narratives that I think has consumed the tournament in retrospect. And so you're up against this version of the deck, and Sam is taking it in a completely different direction, on top of having quite a quixotic build of the deck to begin with here.
Yeah, so Sam was playing this mono blue Infect deck that traded on Blighted Agent and Inkmoth Nexus as flying/unblockable creatures, with Blazing Shoal pitching these just Dragon Storms or Progenitus or whatever. I don't know the reason to play a specific one of those, but they all cost 1 million mana, and they all made it so your 3-card combo of Infect Creature Shoal red card was lethal. You got to play a bunch of Ponders and Piers and Pact of Negations to protect it. And, I did talk to Sam after the last time, on Twitter, that I talked about this story, and he remembers things differently than I do. So I really don't want to overstep here and kind of misrepresent what happened. But from our perspective, and that I can speak to, he chose to draw, and we believed it was because his team, who had tested, had said that drawing was better. They were winning more on the draw, and they had reasons for it too. Sam is obviously someone who cares about the theory behind these things. Regardless of the reasons going into that decision, I still find it to be baffling that was the decision. I don't think drawing first in that matchup really was a good idea, because the way the matchup played out is the Infect deck had a much faster clock than the Zoo deck. You can kill as early as turn 3. The Zoo deck that we had built wasn't really particularly fast. Maybe if you have a double Nikado, double Lightning Bolt draw, you'll kill them by turn 5, but it's pretty hard to kill them on turn 4, and it's impossible to kill them on turn 3. So the Zoo deck had to play the more controlling role, and the deck was actually well suited for that, right? We had Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, Bant Charm, a variety of removal spells, plus Noble Hierarch to be able to leave mana up. But the way the game played out, if the Zoo deck was on the play and let's say played turn 1 Wild Nacatl, the blue deck would just play a land. Turn 2 Tarmogoyf, the blue deck would play like, say, a Blighted Agent or a Nexus. I guess the blue deck can kill on turn 2 with Nexus. Crazy. Anyway, the Zoo deck at that point could just leave its mana up. It didn't have to cast anything else once it had 2 threats in play. 2 was the number, because 1 was usually just a little too slow. A 6-turn clock, off a 3/3 is not going to do it. But once you leave the mana up, the Catfish deck had tons of counters and instant speed interaction and usually could find itself in a good spot. But if you switch that and you're on the draw now, and let's say, the blue deck, the Infect deck plays a turn 2 Blighted Agent, you've played a turn 1 Noble Hierarch Wild Nacatl, turn 2 you can't really tap out, and then they don't have to go for it. And maybe you use your removal spells and they replace the Infect creature, but it's a very different game than the one where the Zoo deck's on the play and gets to establish a board. So we were shocked, to say the least, at the moment when he chose to draw. And even now, in retrospect, looking at the variety of reasons he could have had, which again, I don't want to say that the reasons made no sense. I just don't think the decision was right. And I find it hard to defend that part at the very least.
And so the way the matchup plays out in practice is it comes down to game 5. We have this incredible sweat on the last turn where Josh needs Sam to whiff on a Peer Through Depths. That ends up happening. Josh is through to the finals. And coming off a truly incredible series of finishes over the past year, 18 months, and so on, from your perspective, what would Josh winning that final have meant to him, to you guys as a team, and then to you personally as someone who was heavily invested in his success?
Well, I can't help but think that if Josh had won that PT, he would make it to the Hall of Fame and Team Channel Fireball would be a respected Magic team. Okay, well, those things did happen. But Josh, it would have meant a lot to him, and it would have meant a lot to me if he was a Pro Tour champion. The fact that Estradi beat him in the finals, Samuel Estradi playing Splinter Twin, was something that I guess, Ari can't really speak to this because as far as I know, the only PT finals you made, you won, right?
Those are the only PT top 8 matches I've played, yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that. So you don't have the same perspective, and you're lucky for that. Losing in the finals of a Pro Tour is a kind of unique experience because on the one hand, it's kind of crushing. You could have won the Pro Tour. The biggest difference in the tournament, I think that the biggest differences in finish are between first and second and 8th and 9th. Those are the 2 biggest differences. Because once you make top 8 of the tournament, anywhere but the finals kind of feels the same. Obviously sometimes you make top 4 and you get an extra benefit or you have extra pro points and that comes in handy, whatever. But emotionally, the difference between 3rd through 8th hasn't felt different to me. And I've actually hit all of those numbers. So I've play tested the matchup. The difference of the finals is massive because you could have been a Pro Tour champion and you aren't, you're not that weekend at least. And, Josh's match was a close one. We knew it was going to be a close match going in. Blood Moon ended up really doing a lot of work for Estradi. And if Josh is anything like me, and we're actually very different people, but we, I think, have this part in common, I'm sure that something, as time goes on, he thinks about less, but probably thought about a lot in the many years after that. I still sometimes think about, the Pro Tour finals I've lost. I've managed to do it twice, most recently to Andrew Ellenbogen. And, you can't help think about what is, because you're not really looking at, if I'd won the Pro Tour finals, I'd have $20,000 more, or I would have gotten into this tournament or not. That's not really what it's about, and that's not really what drives most Magic players. I could have been a Pro Tour champion. I could have won the Pro Tour, and I think that's something that Josh isn't really going to get over, but that's part of the reason this game is so awesome. And part of the reason I hope there's something like this in the future is that magic, pun intended, is why we play, and the feeling of getting first versus second versus other finishes, it all matters and we all care about it.
Let's touch on Josh himself quickly, because he's someone who was maybe not in the limelight as much or in the public spotlight as much as some other members of the team, someone who is not maybe tooting his own horn as much. So for players who, especially in recent years, who have not got the chance to see him in action, give us a sense of what he was like then at the height of his powers.
That's a good way to put it, because we had a lot of horn tutors on that team, myself being one of them. And it takes all kinds. And yeah, Josh is not the most outspoken on social media or in person. He's a somewhat private person. He doesn't express his emotions, though he definitely has them. Trust me, I know Josh well enough that we've gotten in there before. But Josh is, when he's in practice, which he very much was at this time, and for a very long stretch of really being, I think, one of the best deck builders in the game. I think the most recent deck I can think that he really did great work on was the Legacy Reanimator deck we played at the Team Pro Tour, the PT25, where he, adding the card Reanimate to a Death Shadow deck. So it wasn't actually Reanimator, sorry. It was Death Shadow with Reanimates. And it was like a blue-black Delver deck that had like Street Wraith plus Reanimate as an actual sick combo. A lot of good disruption. And that's like but one of many awesome decks he's come up with, because he loves attacking new formats. And honestly, part of the reason his passion faded years ago for Magic, there's a reason you haven't really seen him recently, is that the Pro Tour stopped being fresh formats and started being, hey, it's a month into this format where 3 days in it was solved, because your formats are more easily solved and kind of worse these days. And also people have more time with it, and there's more online play, and there's more deck lists. Josh was never and is not interested in trying to find the right list of Gruul adventures. He was trying to find, what is a new deck that people don't expect? What can we break here? What are the cool things that people aren't talking about or aren't doing or haven't figured out? And once that part of the game really stopped being, part of the game, he lost interest, because he did what he came to do. He made the Hall of Fame in 5 Pro Tour top 8s. You can't really look at Josh's resume and say that there wasn't much left that he could have accomplished and didn't.
And that sense of wonder of, whether you're watching the coverage or you're there playing in the tournament yourself, just waiting to see what these people have come up with. It seems like in an era of open deck lists and formats which have already been mostly mined and explored by the time you get to play them, it seems like some of that sense of discovery has been lost, and it's going to be hard to get it back under the current model.
I totally agree. There was nothing like, it used to be when there's 3 rounds of draft, right, to kick off the PT. There was nothing like round 4. You go play your match. You don't know who you're going to play against. You sit down. You play against the deck. Like, okay, I know what this deck is. And you finish your match. And this is the best part. You get to walk around and see, what did Pantheon bring? What did Mastrop, I forget what their name was before. I was going to call them Overstock.com, but that wasn't right. What did all these teams bring if you weren't on the team? What did Channel Fireball bring? Like, what did Shota play this weekend? What did Yuya play this weekend? Probably Tron. What are you going to end up seeing? Because no one really knows, what all the best decks really are. Obviously, you have an idea of the metagame. I can't recall too many Pro Tours, even the fresh formats, where we came in and didn't know any of the decks. Like, we would have been doing kind of a bad job as pros if we did. But it was cool because sometimes, Pantheon's on green-black Seasons Control. That's awesome because we get to play against them, and that deck's terrible. Or Pantheon's on mono-blue Devotion. That's terrible for us. We're on mono-red Devotion. We're going to get creamed. It's just so cool seeing what people have come up with, even outside of like your own chances. Just getting to enjoy that spirit. There's just nothing like that environment in that room. And I've talked to folks who watch a lot of those Pro Tours, from home. The round 4 coverage, when they start seeing what decks are featured and what lists start to leak out, like, that's just such a magical moment. We don't really get that anymore.
So my personal tie-in here is the first PT I played was PT Oath of the Gatewatch, and round 4, I'm sitting next to you, in fact, and you asked to borrow a piece of paper, and I obliged. And
I believe the story.
As I'm looking over, you're shuffling up, and I see a Matter Shaper, and I think, whatever joke this is, I am not in on it. I am the punchline here, along with everyone else who didn't realize this was possible. And so, that sense of just excitement mixed with a little bit of terror. If I had known 3 hours before when the draft started that this is what we were facing, I don't think it would have had quite the same emotional impact on me at the time.
Yeah, and that was a great example where, Team Face to Face, which we were teaming with, came up with this awesome Eldrazi deck. We played the colorless version, which I still maintain was better for the field, whereas the folks from Berkeley played like the blue-red, draft chaff Eldrazi deck that ended up winning the tournament in the hands of JC Tao after defeating, I think, 3 of our deck in the top 8. Like, it was a very good matchup for them. But we had this Eldrazi deck, and it was broken. We put 10 people from our team in the top 25 of the tournament, which is obviously an obscene rate. And that was the kind of cool thing where you would play this tournament. And I remember in that literal tournament going like Eldrazi Temple into the Eldrazi Mimic. And my opponent picking up Mimic, reading it and looking kind of confused, like, what the hell is going on? That's awesome. You don't get that anymore. When you cast your Thieves Guild Enforcer, your opponent doesn't have to read it. They're like, yeah, I'm going to mill 2. Oh, you played a Lovestruck Beast? How original. It's just not the same anymore.
Yeah, it seems like Modern is more conducive than most other formats to that kind of that ability to be broken wide open. And for this tournament in particular, where there is no history of Modern to draw upon, essentially, did it feel like, in retrospect, this was a tournament where there was a massive edge to be gained, or was that actually less acute than you might have expected?
So it's kind of a strange combination of there's definitely a massive edge to be gained if you tested a deck well and made a good metagame call without knowing the metagame. It was hard to predict that, but just had a good deck, which I think we did. We did have a good deck. But on the other hand, we didn't break it. We had a good record, but I didn't feel like, oh, we're going to crush the field. I mean, we were playing a deck with Lightning Bolt and Wild Mikado. Like, this isn't some sort of out of left field deck list that your opponent's not going to know what to do against it. So I don't think we kind of wasted an opportunity because, again, I think our performance was good enough. But yeah, I'm sure that there was something in that tournament that you could have played that, especially given the card pool, that I'm sure would have been obscenely broken. And I kind of miss the days when sometimes that just didn't happen. Like the Stoneforge Mystic plus equipment in a blue-white deck thing could have been legal at prior tournaments before Paris, but it just kind of never came together. And I can't really imagine that happening these days. Like, is that going to happen again?
After that event, I know the next kind of thing queued up was Worlds, and, it was Modern again. Having just come off of that event, what was the general reaction among the team to playing Modern again after the massive sweeping ban announcement there?
So this was a funny year. So in the tournaments that year, at the block tournament, we played Tempered Steel. At the Modern Tournament Philadelphia, as we discussed, we played, Catfish, Aggro, Zoo with counterspells. And then at Worlds, which was split format Standard Modern, we played Tempered Steel in Standard and Zoo in Modern. So it was a real beatdown year. And to be honest, we didn't really test that much Modern for Worlds. I think we played less than 20 games before it because we spent most of our time on Standard. It's just tough to test for a 3-format tournament because Worlds also had draft at this point. It was Innistrad draft. And I remember coming into day 3, and it was also weird. You didn't have to register your day 3 deck until day 3. So, which I don't think is actually the right way to go about things because we had to play 2 days knowing we hadn't registered our 3rd deck and still kind of trying to figure that out. But no one really wants to play test after playing a day of Magic. So we ended up just basically running Zoo back with some slight adjustments, and that it went pretty well because me, Paulo, and Conley all ended up making top 8 of that tournament, in part because of our Modern performances.
And in Worlds in prior years, when Day 3 was extended, or I think at one point Legacy, or whatever that 3rd format was, it seems like whatever was tucked away on Day 3 always became the afterthought. There was no real incentive to devote your efforts there when you have so many other things to prepare for at the same time.
There's a couple of reasons for that. One is those formats tended to be the least explored, which in some senses should give you more incentive to try them because you could come up with something really busted. But in a lot of senses, it was like pros didn't want to, spend a ton of effort relearning or maybe learning for the first time what Legacy is up to. Like, they'd rather just pick a deck that they know is solid and just test Standard. The other thing is the way these tournaments were always structured, it was Standard, Draft, and then, Legacy, Modern, whatever, Extended. But the top 8 was Standard. So if you wanted to win the tournament, you needed to have a good Standard deck. So Priority 1 was standard, and draft has always been one of the biggest edges to be gained in any professional tournament. I'm really sad that it's gone, even if I'm not, by my estimation, one of the top drafters. I still think I'm well above the point where I'd rather play draft than almost any constructed format in terms of, well, both fun and win rate. So yeah, this format always kind of got the shortest end of the stick, and we always had okay-ish decks, but we never found it to be worth putting tons of effort into day 3.
And what do you make of Modern's place in that Pro Tour ecosystem? Because the format had, I think, more so in its early days, some vocal critics, Paolo among them, who would almost rather play any other constructed format than play Modern. But what did you make of its place as part of that Pro Tour rotation?
At some point, it did become more of the format that Paolo disliked than it initially was. Because initially, I think Modern was just a wildly varied format where practice and skill gave you a pretty big edge, like most formats. Eventually it became a lot more linear where, and this is what I think the majority of Paul's complaints were, you just have to play a deck and you hope it's good against the decks you face. There's 10 different decks. You can't prepare for all of them, or you can't play a deck that's good against all of them. And if you play the 3 that are bad, you'll go 0-3. If you play the 3 that are good, you'll go 3-0. That tendency got exacerbated later in the format, but for a number of years, I don't think it was like that. And honestly, I never thought Modern was bad. I always enjoyed playing it. Fetch lands, lightning bolts, mana leaks, remands, these are all cards I really enjoy playing with, and I always found Modern to be a pretty engrossing format.
So with that, I guess we'll wind us up to the present day and maybe lead us out. How have you felt about Modern lately? And I guess if there's anything else you want to cover about PT Philly that kind of ties into where Modern's at now, now's the time to do that. So I've kind of kept my eye on Modern, playing it here and there. I've played in some of the Magic Online prelims, and I'm always looking for cool new decks because people love hearing about Modern, keeping them up to date on that. It looks solid. Modern Horizons 2, I think, hit the nail a little bit closer on the head than Modern Horizons 1. Modern Horizons 1 led to some bans, led to some egregious no bans, like Arkham's Astrolabe was legal for so long. I just don't understand it. So from that perspective, MH2, yeah, it's got Ragavan, Prismatic Ending, a number of other strong cards. Urza Saga is actually doing a lot less than people predicted at first. And overall, I think that, yeah, if one of the cards people point to as one of the most played cards, maybe a broken card, is a Ragavan, a 1-mana 2/1, yeah, there are ways you can kill that thing. I can think of a few right off the top of my head. So I like where Modern's at now. I'm not putting as much pressure on it, and I think everyone's not putting quite as much pressure on it as if there was a Pro Tour. If we saw a Modern Pro Tour, let's say in 2 months, what would Modern look like at the end of that? Pro Tours are kind of they turn coal into diamonds in some senses. They put a ton of pressure on the format, but at the end of it, it's not always for the best. I remember, when people who play Legacy or people who played Modern really wanted these big tournaments to happen. It's kind of be careful what you ask for. Modern might have, 15 heavily played viable decks right now, but it's possible that if you just took, the 400, most invested Magic players, best Magic players, and had them practice Modern for a month and then play it, that number of decks might get narrowed as people actually find out what's the best. Right now, people can kind of play whatever they want, whether it's Mono Blue Elder Deep Fiend Tron or Renin 6 plus Teferi plus Transmogrify. There's just a ton of different things going on. Hammer Time, a mono white equipment deck, is very good. I think Modern's in a great spot right now. I don't really have any complaints about it.
Yeah, a lot of monkey business going on in Modern, and a fair amount in this interview as well. So, Luis, thank you so much for joining us to take the trip down memory lane.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me. This was a blast.
So you heard a lot about Josh Utter-Leyton in that interview there. It's impossible to tell the story of this event without him. Let's go talk to the man himself. And we're joined now by Josh Utter-Leyton, who certainly in this time of Magic, I think it's fair to say, was just destroying everyone in his path. But in terms of this tournament specifically, you are the person, maybe, I guess with maybe one exception, more important to talk to than any other.
Hi.
Let's go back to those days long ago here in mid-2011, where, you have what is scheduled to be this extended Pro Tour on the calendar. You have this bombshell being dropped just a few weeks before the tournament's due to start, that this is actually not going to be some new but somehow stale at the same time extended format. It's going to be Modern. So what was the immediate reaction there for you guys?
having a Pro Tour that is just like a brand new, completely unexplored format that's never been played before is so much fun. Like, that's what I love the most about Magic, is like building brand new decks and figuring everything out from scratch, basically.
In terms of like your Pro Tour history, now people are looking back and you have all these top 8s as of today and, all this history in game design, but where were you at in 2011? Where was this kind of falling in that entire career arc?
So this was the season right after I had finished. This was even before Platinum was a thing. So I had finished level 7. I went Pro Tour I won U.S. Nationals, had a Pro Tour top 8. I had to skip the next Pro Tour for my dad's wedding, and then the top 16 at Worlds that year to end up like at level 7, level 8 being the highest level. So this was like 1 Pro Tour after that season, or something like that. Maybe it was 2.
Yeah, that was you had top 8'd the Block Pro Tour, the Zendikar Block Pro Tour, was it?
Yeah.
And so this was the season coming off that, so pretty deep in competitive Magic. And you had paid a little attention, I guess, before the testing process to Modern, you said, and tested a bit. So then, everyone on your team gets down to business, starts testing a few weeks out. And what can you kind of tell us about that process and, how that kind of unfolded?
Yeah, I mean, our initial reaction was just to look for the broken things. And that's kind of where we started and certainly where I spent most of my time. We knew that the Cloud Post decks were a popular and big thing coming into the event, and kind of our reaction, and turns out most people's reaction to that, was to just go faster. And so you saw a lot of people building like turbo fast combo decks. Like the Cloud Post deck was more of a turn 4 deck. Everybody was trying to find like the best turn 3 decks, or even faster. So the things that I kind of latched onto as the best way to go about that was Storm. There was all of the rituals legal at that point. There was Pyromancer Ascension as an option. So that was one direction, and the other was Infect. And so, not talking about the style of Infect deck that Sandblock played. That wasn't something that I had looked at at all, but just attacking with Infect creatures and pump spells.
How do you get from there are so many unfair things to do in the format, we want to be playing combo of some sort, to Wild Nacatl and Noble Hierarch?
Yeah, well, kind of what we found from basically the combo decks were not interactive when you were trying to just maximize speed, and they were very fragile. So we kind of found that they folded really easily to disruption. And Kibler was the one, obviously, who was working on the Zoo deck that we ended up playing, and he just kept beating us over and over, especially post-sideboarded. Why we ended up on the Zoo deck that we did is because we just felt like the pressure to go faster and faster and more fragile is making, like, the metagame was going to be exploitable as something that could just play an interactive game. And I think the right answer to, like, how to do that was actually probably Splinter Twin, in that it was an interactive deck that also had a combo kill. But Zoo was also another way to do it.
You get done with testing. You decide you're showing off Wild Nacatls. You go into the first rounds of the event, and you start seeing the things kind of unfolding. Was there anything that really surprised you, and how did you sort of feel after those initial rounds? How did you feel about the choice to be playing with Gant Charms? Did you feel like you were on point, or was there some concern that there was something crazy you would miss?
No, it was pretty much what we expected. I think that the most surprising thing to me was how many creature decks people were playing, especially in the earlier rounds. Like, we weren't really expecting to face a lot of, like, Wild Nacatl mirrors or anything like that. But the decks kind of looked like, what we were expecting. A lot of, like, combo decks that were just trying to go faster and faster.
If you had to replay the tournament again after 10 years, would you be inclined to run it back?
Honestly, I think yes. Like, I think Twin was a great choice for the tournament, but I think our deck was actually favored into Twin. So, like, we were kind of doing the same thing, but also won the head-to-head. So I think the Zoo deck did end up being, like, very good for the tournament. If I did run it again, there would probably, I have to imagine that there were better decks out there that could have been found for that tournament. Sam Black's take on Infect, certainly like one of the ones that might have been the best choice.
With that note on Sam Black's deck in mind, are there any specific rounds that stand out to you over the course of the event? Doesn't have to be the semifinals. That is certainly one of the more well-tread matches of this event on all sides.
Other than that, I'd say the quarters in the top 8 was kind of interesting from my end in that my opponent was a teammate of Astrades, who ended up beating me in the finals, playing the same deck. And one of the things that happened in that match was he never brought in Blood Moon. So that kind of like set me up for the finals, not really expecting Blood Moon to be a big factor when it did end up being so.
An understatement of sorts, which we'll get to before too long. But of course, we have to get through this semi-finals matchup first. And I think this, almost whoever you ask, more so than the finals itself or any other event from the tournament, this is the match that gets remembered and spoken about. And in some of the discussions we've had for this project, this is a thing that comes up time and time again. Certainly from Sam, of course, but from others as well. What was your expectation coming into that specific matchup? And then take us through the feeling of surprise, I guess, when you saw how Sam was approaching it differently.
Yeah, so I'd never played against that deck, the one with Blazing Souls. I'd played a lot against the like pump spells plus creatures version of Infect. And I like my experience with that version of the matchup was that it was very favorable for me. And that I could play like pretty conservatively and win. Like I had inevitability. I just needed to make sure I didn't die and I would win the game. Whereas Sam Black's version was like much more resilient and stronger going late. So I kind of had a skewed take on the matchup from that, and obviously no experience against Sam's deck. So going into it, I expected to be a lot more favored than I think I was in reality. I guess that brings us to Sam's choice to draw, and which obviously really surprised me because my take on the matchup was that it was incredibly play draw dependent. Basically, the problem with Sam's reasoning, I think, was that it made sense for him to just want to draw more cards. That both players, both him and I, just drew 10 extra cards at the start of the game that would immensely favor him. So his logic is that just having more cards is going to be a big advantage for him. But I think that where it breaks down is that he just gets more turns in the game if he chooses to play first. So he ends up getting more draw sets than just the draw first one. Because I have to, in order to, not just die, I have to, delay my development so much. Whereas if I'm on the play, I have so much more ability to just play to the board and end the game a lot faster with creatures.
And so when you hear Sam announce that decision, and it's something which is, doesn't really make sense to you and is taking you off guard, is there part of you that's thinking, does he just know something I don't? You see some of this where it's Rafa Tapper choosing to draw against everyone at every opportunity whenever possible, right? Or just in general, part of, I think, what keeps Magic engaging is that you do have these opportunities, these very counterintuitive decisions, which, if they go well, look like they're genius, and if they go wrong, people wonder what you were thinking the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction was very surprised, but it wasn't oh my god, this is so stupid. It was, okay, what is he thinking? And just trying to work out his thought process of he wants more cards, and it took me a while to actually think through whether that would be beneficial for him. And I just came to the conclusion at some point just during that first game. I guess I wasn't going to have a chance to choose to play or draw again anyway, since I was already down 0-2 at that point, or 1-2.
And regardless of the merits of that decision, it ends up being a very tight match. You get down to a close game 5 where, an end of turn peer through depth goes on the stack, and this is, your entire tournament flashing before your eyes. What was going through your head in that moment?
I mean, at that point, it's out of my hands. Like, there's literally nothing I can do. So it's just, all right, let's spin the wheel.
Sure. And depending on how you look at it, Sam misses his shot, or you hit your however many outs it was, so to speak, and you're on to the finals now. I believe this was the furthest you progressed in a Pro Tour top 8 at that point, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So did that add anything to the stakes of, like, you're already kind of outdoing your previous record and expectations, and now, like, of course, this is the Pro Tour finals, right? And the difference between being the champion and second place, financially, psychologically, and so on, has to be pretty immense.
Yeah, of course. I don't really think that, like, previous, like, experience in the top 8 even matters at that point. Like, you know, it's not like I'm happy at that point that this is. So it's hard to explain. Like, I am happy that this is the farthest I've ever been. It's awesome to be in the finals of the Pro Tour, but it's also like, I'm here to win. Like, I really want this. And I'm going to be super disappointed if I don't win this finals.
I think in terms of the public persona, you know, on coverage or so on, you seem like someone who is pretty unflappable and isn't giving too much away at the table. Is that concealing a bundle of nerves inside, or are you mostly able to put that aside when it comes to getting in a game?
I'm very good at focusing. So I'm able to, like, pretty much just, like, tune everything else out and just focus on the match. And when I am doing that successfully, like, I'm not really feeling pressure or the stakes or anything else. I'm just playing a game of Magic, and that's, you know, consuming my thoughts and whatnot. You know, before playing, after playing, obviously that's when I actually feel everything. So I guess there's some amount of, like, before we're into it or whatever, concealing, you know, how nervous I am, how, like, you know, excited I am. But during the game, there's no amount of that. It's actually just playing a game of Magic for me.
And as you're playing the game of Magic, what was that finals like from your perspective? Take us through that.
I mean, I don't remember all the details at this point, really. Obviously, Blood Moon ended up being the like key factor in the match. I think the first game that I got Blood Mooned, it was when Estradi was on the play. And I felt that made a lot more sense, both like surprise factor and just it being way stronger on the play. And then in the last game, it was me on the play, and he was able to Blood Moon me right out of the game. And I was really not expecting him to have it in his deck at all on the draw. So he definitely caught me off guard and was able to kind of like steal a win with that, you know, kind of tricky choice. My deck did have, like, some ability to play around Blood Moon, like, being able to fetch basics and whatnot, and I just chose not to. He got me. Like, I expected one thing, he did something else, and he was able to win as a result. That's just, like, good gameplay. Did I make a wrong decision when I chose, you know, not to play around it and make sure I was able to cast my spells in the face of not Blood Moon? Again, I don't really remember the details. It might have been a mistake. It might have just been, you know, I got outplayed. It might have just been like we both played correctly and the chips fell in his favor type thing.
So you leave this event. What are your thoughts on Modern after having played it this first time? Like, what are you thinking about having to play the format at Worlds in a few months?
Given that I chose to play Zoo and that the best performing decks at the tournament were basically fair decks in Twin and Zoo and whatnot, I thought the format was actually in like a pretty cool spot where you could do all these broken things, but you could actually also just like beat them playing normal games of Magic. So at this point I had always loved Extended. Like that was always like one of my favorite formats to play, and having something that kind of mimicked Extended in this new form that still had like a whole ton of exploration left was still really exciting to me.
And so in the immediate aftermath of Philly, you know, it ends up being Estradi hoisting the trophy instead of yourself. In that moment on the day, and then, you know, as the days and weeks go by, what's your just reflection on the tournament at that point? Did it feel like a satisfying outcome? Was it in some ways like the most frustrating outcome you could get? Or how are you able to rationalize it?
Well, it's both of those things. Yeah. It's both like super satisfying. It's awesome. Like it's incredible to make the finals of the Pro Tour, but it's also like, it's always frustrating, when you lose a match of Magic, and the higher the stakes are for the match, the more frustrating it is. So it's also like the most frustrating. Like it is both of those things.
It's now been 10 years since this event. You know, over the years have played a ton of Modern Pro Tours. You won a Modern Grand Prix with the breakout weekend for Death Shadow. How have you felt about the format, and, you know, how do you feel it's aged in that time since then?
I mean, I used to love Modern. It was a format that felt like the card pool was so large, you always had a ton of different options for building decks. Like, as much as I hate the mechanics of fetch lands, like the gameplay with them was actually really, really cool to me, in that you could always like solve any problem if you were willing to pay the cost for it. Like, I played a ton of the Jund decks over the years in Modern, and it was always so cool that, like, if you had something that you wanted to beat, you could do it, and you could have access to the colors that let you do it if you wanted, but it wasn't always correct. I played, you know, a straight green-black, quote-unquote, Jund deck. I played, you know, different four-color Jund decks. Like, that aspect of the mana bases in Modern was really cool. In something like Legacy, they feel a little bit too free for the splashes, whereas in Modern, the costs were real, and sometimes worth it, sometimes not. The variety of different decks and gameplay experiences that Modern gives is really cool. You know, you would have various flavors of, like, aggressive creature decks, from Burn to Zoo to Affinity, with all varying amounts of, like, synergy and combo elements. You would have, like, combo decks that are all doing, like, very different things and playing very different kinds of games. You know, the kinds of decks that I enjoyed playing the most were always the, like, looking to interact and stop my opponent from trying to do what they wanted to do. And even if my deck was the same throughout the years, you know, if I'm playing Jund 3 years straight, it's still really fun because I'm playing against different things all the time, and I'm having to constantly change my deck to adapt to what other people are doing. So I love Modern for a long time, and I'm sad to see it turn into Modern Horizons block constructed these days.
So that was Josh Utter-Leyton. This was not his first Pro Tour top 8, it certainly was not his last, and if you want to hear the other side of that story about choosing to draw, or you just want to take a journey into the mind of Sam Black, and why wouldn't you, let's go do that right now. We're joined now by Sam Black, who, if you have followed competitive Magic over the past decade, or the content on Star City Games over the past decade, you need no introduction to Sam. Give us a brief rundown of competitive Magic and your place in it at this time in 2011.
Yeah, so I had been playing on the Pro Tour for a while. My first Pro Tour was in 2006, so I guess I'd been playing on and off for 5 years. I was consistently qualified at this point. I had finished second at Nationals in like 2007, and then 2008, one of those years. And then that led to playing on the U.S. Nationals team at Worlds with Paul Sheehan and Mike Jacob, and we won the team portion of Worlds that year. So I had some like pro success. I didn't have any like Pro Tour top 8s, but I'd had some like good GP results by that time, and was like, you know, on the train or qualified for everything.
You get the news that instead of this possibly doomed already extended format, you are instead going to be playing Modern, this brand new puzzle that you have to figure out. How did you set about doing that?
I don't remember exactly like where we started with testing for Modern. I know that the team that I was working on was drawn, I think, pretty early to Storm. You know, Blue-Red Storm with like Ponder and Preordain, and like, you know, Rite of Flame and the various rituals and killing with Grape Shot. I don't remember if like we were doing something else first, but that's like what that had been like our default deck, that we expected to play at the point that, the like Blazing Shoal engine was introduced to me.
Blazing Shoal joins the Modern ban list immediately after this event, largely thanks to your efforts, and has remained there to this day. But at the time, this was an unknown quantity that people hadn't discovered yet. So what first drew your attention to that?
Yeah, so like I said, we had been playing Blue-Red Storm, and then John Stoltzman Not exactly a household name on the Pro Tour, but he is like a friend of mine who I know from playing Magic in Madison, who I guess is better known for having won a like World Series of Poker tournament. He had like come up with this crazy deck, and he was like, "Hey, I have this like cool deck I'm working on. Let me like show you." And it was, you know, like killing with Blazing Shoal on Thexus and Blighted Agent, and had like the transmute for Blazing Shoal package and stuff. And I was like, I don't know, this looks pretty weird. And we played, and like I played Storm and he played that, and he was crushing me. A lot of it was like he had a fast combo backed by counter magic, and like just got to have more counter spells than my Storm deck did. And so like we were both playing combo, but his interacted and was faster, which is like the best possible place to be in a combo mirror. But his list was really rough. Basically, like I don't remember exactly what like card selection he was using, but I know that it wasn't Ponder, Preordain, or Peer Through Depths, which were like the primary pieces that we were using. I think he did have like Muddle the Mixture, but like I think that it was more of like that kind of like more expensive search type stuff, or maybe just like more cards like Remand and stuff to like dig that way. So once I saw like, okay, you're playing like a mono blue like combo deck that's trying to assemble these like pieces, I was like, I've been playing this like blue deck that's really good at digging for certain cards. Like, what if we just put Pondered Preordain into this other deck to like have that way to find our pieces? So he knew what he wanted to do, where he wanted to assemble like Blazing Shoal, pitching something expensive, targeting one of these evasive impact creatures. And then I kind of helped with like figuring out the right glue. Like, okay, these are what you want to find these pieces. Here's like the right package to find these pieces. And then I think he had been kind of like ostensibly on a different team preparing for this event that Patrick Chapin was on. And Chapin's idea was to use Peer Through Depths to find Dragonstorm, where previously we'd been using like Summoner's Pact to find Progenitus. We could get the benefit of Summoner's Pact by having like one Summoner's Pact that you could Teleria West for, and then having a Progenitus or Reaper's King in our deck, and then also have Dragonstorm and Peer Through Depths, and then Peer Through Depths can find either half of the non-impact part of the combo. So you can find either the big spell to pitch or the Blazing Shoal. So I think Chapin brought up the idea of using Peer Through Depths, and I don't think he ended up playing a deck anything like this, but he was aware of the project and suggested like that little innovation. One of the like weirder things that was going on in terms of like figuring out like which cantrips to play is that the deck didn't play 4 copies of Gitaxian Probe, which was absolutely mind-blowing to me when we were testing. And like you know, like when I first saw the deck, it's like obviously this wants 4 probes. Like it digs, it tells you if it's safe. Like knowing whether you can go for your combo or not is huge. Everything about what this card is doing is perfect. But we ended up not maxing our probes. And the reason is that when you mulligan, you don't have any idea what card you're going to, like, this probe represents question mark, and you need a lot of information about your mulligans. Also, when you cast like Ponder or Preordain or Peer Through Depths, this probe it's not like you have a 58 card deck, or like a 56 card deck or whatever, because all these cards that look at cards have to see that probe, and the probe is never a card you want. It doesn't tell you if you're getting the piece you need. And so if you like, instead of playing those probes, play just like a piece that is guaranteed to be something, then when you're casting your dig spells, you know, is this the card that I'm looking for or not? And when you're mulliganing, you know, is this card functional? Does this give me the, like, you know, piece that I need here or not? So I think we ended up playing 2 probes. So you still sometimes got that information and got to know the coast was clear, but really, really bizarrely from a theory standpoint, everyone obviously at this point should have a lot of respect for probe, banned and modern at this point. And we didn't play 4 because the other card draw was so powerful, and probe kind of reduced the power level of your other cantrips by being this question mark piece.
Yeah, there's I think a Chris Bakula tweet to the effect of, the first thing I'm going to do when I get to the pearly gates is ask how many probes I should have been playing in all of my decks. And it sounds like for your purposes, the answer may be exactly 2, as it turns out.
Yeah, I mean, seeing their hand is sweet, getting probe flooded was a huge cost. And it's, there's certainly a mindset that would see that tweet and be like, why on earth would that be your question? Obviously, you're supposed to play 4. But our experience testing the deck was, actually don't think so. And then, so that got us basically the core of the deck. There was a lot of fine tuning to do. And then so we had no idea what other people would be doing. Is this deck going to be popular? Somehow I ended up finding out that Cedric was also interested in blazing stalling people. And so I ended up talking to Cedric, not well in advance of the tournament, at the tournament the day before or something. And we compared notes enough that I knew that he was playing a very similar deck, but with black, so that he would have Thoughtseize and Plague Stinger. And we, debated the merits of, okay, you get like more threats, but the extra one is worse than the others. Your mana's not as good. You get Thoughtseize, but you can just be playing Spell Pierce or a counter spell or something instead. And so I ended up deciding that I didn't like the black, largely because of the same reason that I didn't really value the information from Probe that much, which was that I felt like the deck going off was more about bottlenecking your opponent on mana than it was about making sure they didn't have an answer. So it was my opponent might have a bunch of removal spells in their hand, but I can the maximum number, because I know that no one in this format, because I suspected that no one in this format was playing Gutshot or Sudden Shock, I knew that all of their answers cost at least 1 mana. And so if my opponent has 1 mana up, they have no matter what their hand is, on that turn, they have at most 1 removal spell. If they have 2 mana up, they have at most 2 removal spells. And then I could ignore their hand and just focus on, I need counter spells equal to their number of untapped mana. And because the deck is operating at such high speed, killing so early, and because there's so much pressure on them to put pressure on me, they can't leave a lot of lands untapped. And so my sculpting my hand was, okay, well, my combo doesn't cost any mana, and a lot of my counter spells don't cost any mana. So whatever counters I have, I can generally just cast all of. So I just need counter spells equal to my opponent's untapped mana, and they're dead. And that's what I was building toward. And Thoughtseize doesn't help you at all in that equation. Thoughtseize is almost like a bad Giga-Rest if you're trying to kill someone that way.
You have a tuned version of this Blazing Shoal deck, and it seems like the basic concept had gotten out at this point. Blazing Shoal is sold out on Magic Online, and it seems like everyone, the buzz is out there that this is a thing that you can do in the format. And so this is something of a known quantity. But as the constructed rounds start to unfold, how confident were you that, you had kind of mapped the contours of the format and there wasn't anything out there that was going to completely blindside you and take you by surprise?
So I knew that my deck seemed very powerful. I knew that I knew that the format was going to be pretty busted and there were going to be a lot of combo decks, and it felt like I was playing, my goal was to structurally be playing the combo deck that beats other combo decks. There's the end part of my story about Cedric wasn't actually he was playing black cards and that was stupid. It was, he told me about Snapback, which was a card that I hadn't considered but put in my deck to be able to transmute for an answer to get rid of a creature that was locking me out of the game. That ended up being really important. Won me a lot of games, including in the top 4 match against Josh, to be able to just get your Gaddock Teeg out of here, kill you.
I'd like to add one bit of flavor to this because I know exactly how you found out Cedric was playing, in fact.
Oh, great. Is it you?
No, it's because Cedric was sitting in the middle of the event hall playing against like 5 different people, whoever was in front of him, and yelling very loudly about his Wild Infect deck.
Okay. Sure. But yeah, so I had no idea, like, you know, how many people are playing this, how similar is their deck to mine, is everyone on Cedric's version or whatever. So I sit down to the first round of Constructed, and I'm sitting next to, like, Martin Hughes is in the match next to me. And I see him draw his opening hand, and he's playing, like, Blazing Shoal, but he has, like, Vector Asp and Spoils the Vault. And I'm like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, this is not a version I'd consider. Like, is their deck better than mine? Well, like, Spoils the Vault might just kill you, and I'm not playing that card. And I still feel like I find my combo. I think I like that I find my combo without maybe killing myself. But I was certainly just like, oh, there's just this other version of the deck that I didn't know anything about. But I mostly played against opponents who were playing like other stuff. Like I think my first or second round was probably against someone playing Affinity. And then I think I played against someone who had like Kiki Jiki in their deck. And like in general, they were just doing things that were kind of slow. There's a lot of hype for the format. There's a lot of hype around the format about like Cloud Post. And it didn't seem like I could ever lose to someone who put a Cloud Post in their deck. So for the most part, like I was seeing that like, oh, there are other approaches to this. I wonder if they're better than me. But all my matches are really easy. I'm just playing against people who are just like not playing the same game I am.
Did it seem like, so for this tournament where there really is no frame of reference really, and it's a completely new wide open format, did you feel like the comparative advantage that you had over, let's say, a PTQ winner who's working by themselves and just, you know, cobbling together whatever they can?
I don't care if they were working by themselves or with a team. I felt like my advantage over like everyone I played against, regardless of how, you know, well connected they were, was like bigger than any other tournament I've played.
Well, fair enough then. Yeah. So as you sail through the constructed rounds with this deck, it seems like the top 8 is at least on the table here in sight. What did the prospect of that mean to you personally, and how kind of realistic did it feel? Was that like affecting your mindset as this was unfolding at all?
I have to assume yes, in that like, so as far as like my own mental game and stuff, like I don't get like, I don't really care about losing. I don't like get like tilted when things go badly. But I do, I have an absolutely awful like conversion rate from like Grand Prix for top 8s to first places. And like I haven't made it to the finals of a Pro Tour. I get very excited about like success and the possibility of success in a way that I think likely hurts me. And so I have to assume that in this tournament, while things were going really well and it looked like I was going to top 8, that I was probably like not playing my best just because of like being excited about where I was. Fortunately, the last rounds were constructed and my deck was really, really, really good. And so like if I was playing at like, you know, 90% of my normal game instead of like 100% of my normal game, it wouldn't have mattered.
Sure. And so once you lock out that top 8, you know you're playing on the Sunday stage the next day. What is that overnight feeling like? Were you able to focus on just like, was it all business or?
So that was like, you know, my first Pro Tour top 8, and I was playing with a really good team and we were taking it very, very seriously. And I was just like, okay, like we need to like get to work. And so I was preparing for my top 8 match, which is going to be against Jesse Hampton on a green Cloud Post deck. And so John Finkel was my playtest partner for that. He was playing Jesse's deck, and I was just making sure that I like knew everything about how the match was going to go. I know that we thought that I was a huge favorite both before and after testing, but I think that we did like find some ways that I could lose or whatever. And so like, I knew like what to watch out for. I don't remember any of it at this point. My match against him was like not particularly memorable to me, just because I remember thinking of it as a lopsided matchup and winning in relatively uneventful fashion. Like the games just went the way I expected. So I was mostly preparing for that matchup, even though like it was going to be the easier one because, you know, it's the first one. It's like, that's what I need to win to get anywhere else. And I would have some time the next day to work on my later matchups. But we knew that I was like likely to win that one and that the next matchup was going to be much harder. And so that night, Tom Martell and Drew Levin were going deep preparing for my possible match against Raptor's Zoo deck. And we knew that like Zoo in general was like my worst matchup because they have a lot of cheap removal and a good clock. My counter spells aren't especially good. They even had like Thoughtseize. Like it was just, you know, they were playing like anti-combo aggro. And I was playing creature-based combo, which meant even their removal was good. So that was like known to be a really hard matchup. And so they were basically trying to figure out like any kind of like Hail Mary I could put together to win. And so, this is where the telling of this Pro Tour, it gets, from my perspective, focused on this one unusual decision, which was that in my match in the top four, I decided to draw first. That is, I guess, not particularly in line with conventional wisdom about when two very fast decks are playing against each other. Apparently, most people believe that you want to be in play in that spot. And I chose to be on the draw because their reasoning and suggestions all made sense to me, which is both of us were siding into a much more interactive game plan. And there was going to be a lot more resources trading. It was possible that the game was going to go into a much more like attrition-based space than it was in game one. And my deck, operates on a really small amount of mana and doesn't use extra lands well. It cantrips a lot. If you've ever played any deck that has a lot of cantrips and doesn't have Brainstorm, you probably know that if the game goes long, you just like cantrip into land at some point and you start to like flood out pretty badly in the late game. So if we're like trading resources and my first like iteration of the combo isn't going to get it done, then like it's very possible that I'm just going to flood out. So we wanted to cut lands. We were like, okay, if we're going to be trading resources, like I need more resources and I don't have card draw. So like the only way that I can just like out resource them is by just drawing fewer lands in them, which isn't going to happen if my deck is full of cantrips that draw into lands. So I want to just play fewer lands than I'm playing. But I was already playing a really low number of lands. And so like cutting lands meant that my deck wasn't going to be functional on the play. I actually think that this is something that people just don't pay enough attention to in general in sideboarding, is that if you're going to be on the play or the draw. And like, if you have like being on the draw, like just in terms of your odds of like hitting your third land, hitting your fourth land, like being on the draw matters more than like playing two additional lands or whatever. Obviously that depends somewhat on like whether we're talking limited or constructed and what number of lands we're moving to. But the impact, I think, is like massively underestimated in like the community in general, and certainly in the way that people sideboard, knowing whether they're going to be on the play or the draw. So my deck could play like it was designed to play, not knowing whether it was on the play or the draw, with two fewer lands if I was on the draw. But not if I'm on the play. If I'm on the play, I'm just not going to be able to like not going to be able to like cast a spell on turn two, like not be able to cast Blighted Agent on turn two much of the time. So I wanted to cut lands, and I thought we were going to be trading more, so the extra card matters more. And those two things combined, we're going to be trading, so I want extra card, and also I want more like threat density in my deck, so I want to cut lands for spells, meant there's like multiple different pressures to choose draw, so I did. And then was that good or bad? Was it good for me that I chose draw in the games we played? I'm honestly not sure. I haven't like gone back and like super carefully studied them. To me, kind of like the main story about that top 8 specifically that's lasted since then.
It seems like that becomes the main story because that's where the story ends, and you know that climactic final turn against Raptor, you cast Play Through Depths, you're some very high percentage, right, to find the missing piece and win the game 5. If you move on to the finals from there, almost regardless of how the finals goes, it feels like that choice does not become the thing that gets like randomly relitigated every few years, you know, to prove some other point.
Certainly also, like, if I win, people are just less likely to berate me for it. Like,
for sure.
You know, if I win that match, the narrative is probably like, oh yeah, Sam did this thing, it worked, and then he was in the finals, and then there's whatever story happens in the finals. Whereas it's very easy to be like, yeah, like, Sam made a ridiculous choice and lost, and let's just assume that it's because of that. When, like, I got to game 5 in a spot where, like, 2 turns before the game ended, I was a huge favorite in a matchup that was atrocious. Like, so I don't know. I mean, I don't have any, like, evidence after the fact that makes me think it was probably wrong. Like, my thinking hasn't really changed from when I made the decision.
And when that run ends, what's the immediate feeling there? And, you know, as you have time to kind of decompress and look back in the days afterwards and, you know, now in the years afterwards, what did that mean to you then?
Well, so my mindset in that top 8 had been, this deck is awesome. It's like so far ahead in this tournament. I want to do it justice and show people how sweet it is. And, like, I don't want to, like, mess up playing this deck and have the deck go down in history as not having been as good as it was. Like, my mindset wasn't about, like, what this is going to mean for me. It was really about, like, I am, you know, in this position where I'm, like, the flag bearer for this, like, amazing creation, and I need to make sure the creation gets due respect. And so, like, I really just was focused on, I need to play this as well as possible so that the deck can get the, like, you know, recognition it deserves. And I am very happy with my in-game play throughout that tournament and in the top 8 with the deck.
You've racked up a lot of accolades since then, and some of those times you're not going to have the same attachment to your role in that story, if that makes sense. So, like, the Kyoto red deck, where it's like,
yeah, well, the Kyoto red deck,
it's a red deck, right? It's, you know,
everything about my, like, mental place in Philly compared to Kyoto was just completely different. Like, Philly was my first top 8. My partner is from Philly, and they were with me with their mom at that tournament. My partner's mom was in the building during that top 8. And, like, it was my first top 8. I was, like, you know, playing this incredible deck and trying to make sure that, like, you know, it got its due respect, and also, you know, fully aware of what it would mean for me and my career. Versus, like, Kyoto, I was playing a deck that I knew that, you know, had no creativity behind it whatsoever. Like, I played it because Jerry was just like, why aren't you playing this red deck? It's the best deck. And I was just like, fair enough. I don't like anything else anyway. But I thought that my list of it was actively bad. Like, not even just like I'm playing the stock deck, but I'm playing a bad version of the stock deck. And, I'm not playing a deck that I, like, particularly enjoy playing or care about. And there was, like, other stuff going on in my life that was, like, distractingly not great. And, like, you know, after, like, Philly, I was, like, really happy about that. And, you know, just, like, you know, in the following days, just, like, you know, in a really, like, happy place because of that event. Whereas like in the days following Kyoto, it was just like, there was this tournament that I kept winning matches in. I don't really understand why, and I don't really care about it. I'm focused on some other stuff. Yeah, totally different experiences.
So against the longer term context of, I know you said that your driving goal throughout these years was you eventually want to be in the Hall of Fame. And as that goal, you work towards that goal, and then the concept of the Hall of Fame like falls out of reach with how organized play is changing. Was there part of you that looked back on some of these finishes as well, if I just hit that 90% against Raptor and then I go to the finals and I win the tournament, then my case is a lot better? Like, is there any kind of retrospective regret in that sense?
No, because you're talking about like, now that this goal has become like more impossible seeming, do you wish you'd done like, do you wish something had gone better to like let you achieve it before it became impossible? The problem is that at the same time that it became impossible, it also became kind of like irrelevant in that like the reason that the Hall of Fame was important to me is that the Hall of Fame conveyed lifetime invites. It was like getting tenure. And to me, like getting tenure in like professional play was like, okay, now I am just like formally part of this thing. And like what I wanted to be was just like, I wanted tenure. I wanted to be just like enshrined as part of this thing. And once they basically like stop respecting that promise to the Hall of Fame, then the Hall of Fame just doesn't exist to me. Like, as far as I'm concerned, they basically just like broke the promise of what this thing is and like destroyed it. And so when it's like, don't you wish you'd been in this thing that was like disgraced and destroyed? I'm like, no, that would probably be pretty frustrating. Like they didn't just make it impossible for me to achieve the dream, but they like desecrated and destroyed the dream. And so it doesn't lead to a lot of like, oh, I wish I'd done it right, or I wish I'd made it, because the thing that it was just was a lie.
That makes sense. Yeah, and that's an unfortunate state of affairs, to be sure. When, in the aftermath of this tournament, they have to correct a lot of the mistakes in the initial modern format, from that point, this sets off a quite turbulent 10-year history of modern. The impression I got from your modern content over the years was you seem to have more faith in just the core conceit of modern and its ability to change and renew itself over time than a lot of the people who were engaged with it. Is that a fair description?
So I think specifically, especially early on, a lot of pros who engaged with modern felt like the gameplay was bad, specifically because there was a lot of pressure to like do something unfair, which they view as do something linear, and that there are hate cards that are good against all the linear things. And so too many of the games come down to, did my opponent draw their hate card that shuts down my deck? And so then there's like no gameplay post sideboard. I think is kind of like the most common like spike criticism of modern. And as someone who actually played modern, that just didn't line up with my experiences very often. I felt like most of the like hate that existed had like, counterplay, and a lot of the hate you'd like draw a little too late, and then like the opponent's kind of established, and then you have to play this like kind of weird game where like they have something going on, but their deck isn't good at continuing to do its thing. Or just like, the decks end up like getting more diluted and interactive, and you play like scrappy post-sideboard games the way that you would in any kind of post-sideboard constructed format. So I guess, I don't know, maybe it's something about like my deck choice in particular, or just my expectations or approach, but like a lot of the complaints about modern gameplay just didn't land or didn't line up with my experiences. So I'd say that I did generally enjoy modern more than most players. Though I would note that in early modern pro tours, there was a while where a lot of the Storm cards were still legal, and I was on a team with John Finkel, which led to the team concluding that they should play Storm a lot of the time, and I didn't especially like playing Storm. But I would say, like, once critical mass of Storm cards were banned, such that I could start playing, I don't know, Thoughtseize or whatever as my, like, go-to modern card, I started liking it more.
They save Finkel from himself, and then that save you, and then, you know, you're free to spread your wings.
Finkel, he still kept doing his thing, let's be real. But everyone else is not tricked in the future.
To the extent that you can or want to answer this, when you had the chance to go behind the curtain and to be part of the team working on MH2, did it seem like your understanding of, you know, where the format was at or some of the core assumptions that underpinned it lined up with theirs in a way that, you know, was led to you all being on the same page?
So Brad, BBD, and I were brought in to work with a team of specifically Michael Majors, Dan Musser, and Zach Elsick, led by Aaron Forsyth, who has a lot on his plate. And so he was largely dealing with other stuff, but he would come by occasionally. But like the playtesting and stuff was the 6 other people for the most part. And so they brought in the 3 outside consultants because they didn't have a ton of familiarity with Modern. So they didn't necessarily have like strong like preconceptions about it. I will say that like what they had their Magic Online data. And so they knew that like throughout the last several years, players in general like didn't respect Eldrazi Tron, despite the fact that it had the best moto numbers just forever. And so I think that they largely thought that people were wrong to be as dismissive of Eldrazi Tron as they were, and that like there was just a really long time where everyone should have been playing Eldrazi Tron in every tournament according to like the information that they had. I think that my perception was, hey, I'm playing a bunch of new cards. All the cards you're printing are really messed up. Modern changes really quickly relative to where it has been for the past several years. So, like, I don't trust that the Modern I'm playing now is the Modern people are going to be playing when MH2 comes out. And they really, like, wanted to, like, test MH2 cards against, like, you know, Tron and, like, Mono Red Prowess and, like, Titan and whatever decks people were playing right then. And they were like, you know, here are some new cards that exist, like, factor these in, include these in your decks. But, like, I believe that, like, factor these in was, like, a much larger picture, like, a much more complicated process than, like, they were kind of imagining when they wanted to, like, test against current Modern decks. And where that really came to a head was when I discovered the companion mechanic. And I was like, Modern is just not the same format if these things exist, because you literally have to build your deck around one of them. And they were like, no, I don't know about that. These things are pretty balanced. They all have like a pretty serious like deck building cost. And I was just like, no, that's not what these cards say. Like, Yoria and Luris are basically free, and if you're not playing one of them, you're a maniac. We didn't necessarily see eye to eye on that at the time.
Fair enough. So on that note, I guess an opportunity for any kind of freestyle closing thoughts on Modern over the years, or I guess circling back to that specific tournament, any closing thoughts on Pro Tour Philadelphia 10 years after the fact, you know, really thrusting you into the limelight?
I'm glad that happened, if that's your question.
The question's whatever you want it to be, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, when I say I'm glad that it happened, I mean, it really did feel like a, you know, honor and privilege just to get to play that deck. And I'm, you know, really glad that, like, Stoltzman, like, both reached out to me and saw me as the kind of person who would be receptive to his, like, crazy outside of the box combo and, like, take him seriously, give him the time of day, pay attention to his deck, like, test seriously against it and, like, give it a chance. And, you know, I'm glad that, like, I am that kind of person. He was right to see me that way. And, I'm glad that like all the different things came together to get the various insights that we got from, everyone who had a hand in the deck. And I'm glad that, things broke well enough for me that even though I lost a game of limited where I kept a hand that I was actively happy about against an opponent who mulliganed to 3, I one of the unluckiest games I've ever played in a tournament. Despite that happening in that game, I was still able to top 8 the tournament because the constructed went so well. I don't know. I have a lot of good feelings about kind of just like my approach to like getting information in general and like processing like ideas from people that I think were like really showcased in getting me to the moment where I was playing that deck, and that obviously my success in that tournament largely comes to deck selection.
So that was the ever brilliant Sam Black, and those were 3 people who, between them, are no strangers to Pro Tour top 8s, competitive Magic at the highest level. We're going to be taking the episode in a little bit of a different direction now after a short break. See you soon.
The SCG Tour Online is back. Starting Friday, July 23rd, you can play the best events in competitive Magic for thousands of dollars in cash prizes, piles of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena qualifier invitations to skip that mythic grind, and at the very top, invitations to the MTG Arena Championships and the StarCityGames.com Invitational returning to Roanoke, Virginia from October 29th to October 31st. You heard that right, the SCG Invitational is also back, and you know the best place to qualify for it? That's right, the SCG Tour Online. Check out StarCityGames.com/SCG Tour Online to register for events, see upcoming event schedules, and get all the details on how you can earn prizes and invitations playing the SCG Tour Online.
Hello again, and welcome to Act 2 of our show today, which starts with a very distinctive voice on the Pro Tour, someone who has been there from its inception, charting its history. If you're doing a work of history for the Pro Tour, as this aspires to be, you cannot do it without him. It is the one and only Brian David Marshall. And I'm joined now for this segment by Brian David Marshall, who, if you're making an effort to chronicle the history of the competitive Magic and the Pro Tour in particular, there really is no better person to talk to. So thank you very much for joining us, Brian. I guess to start this off, could you give us a quick briefing on what the state of Magic at the Pro Tour level looked like a decade ago now, in 2011?
Wow. So, I've been involved with Magic for a long time, but when I got involved with competitive Magic from the coverage side of things was really around 2003, 2004. And Magic was kind of in a weird state at that time. A lot of players had left to go play poker, to do other things. There wasn't a lot of, player attention. A lot of the earliest stars of the game had moved on to other things. And I think a big part of what, I was doing and was involved with was, star building through the print coverage and eventually, being in the booth, but also through my column and through the Hall of Fame, which, ended up doing a very good job of re-engaging some players who had lost their way maybe in the earliest of the 2000s. So like from about 2005, when, the Pro Tour, started doing the Hall of Fame through this point around 2011, I would say, this was kind of like the peak of that effort. And you really saw it, right? Like there were new players all over the place, but there were also, John Finkel was regularly making the top 8 of events, and new players were, doing well, and players from all over the world were doing well. So, it really felt like to me, someone who, there was kind of a little bit of the mission that we had, from the coverage and Hall of Fame and columnist side of things. It felt like pretty successful. I mean, I felt pretty excited about it. And at this point, now players are starting to serve as, like, hey, let's talk about this new format. let's get the pros breaking a brand new format, which was, I think, a lot of excitement heading into that Philadelphia weekend.
And in terms of national rivalries or Pro Tour Magic as a global phenomenon, it seems like the narrative in the mid to late 2000s was American Magic was in the doldrums almost, and you had Japan really making a name for themselves. You had a lot of that talent leaving for greener pastures or doing other things. And this is maybe at the point where American Magic is starting to reassert itself, primarily in the form of like this Channel Fireball super team and a bunch of these pros who were, I guess, taking back, not Sunday necessarily, but taking back something on behalf of the Americans.
That was that was earlier 2000s, right? That was also Pro Tour Philadelphia, the big Taking Back Sunday when Gadiel won. Right. That was Philadelphia, 2005 or 2006?
Yeah, that was the first big tournament that I remember watching on the grainy webcast. You had to navigate the mothership to find somehow. But coming into this tournament, it seems like geographically there's a lot more going on, and you have countries, not just the reemergence of the US, but also countries who were not known for their prowess in competitive Magic before this point, starting to have one or two people from them, carrying the torch and putting them on the big stage as well.
Absolutely. It was a huge deal that this top 8 had Samuele Estradi and Alessandro Portaro in it, right? 2 Italian players. Where Italy is not, it had some success here and there, but, it felt like a real moment for Italian Magic.
And so coming into the tournament, what would you say the expectations were in terms of who were the people that we're keeping our eyes on, or from a coverage standpoint, these are the stories that we expect to highlight, and then also accompany those with whatever emerges over the course of the event?
Sam Black is definitely someone who people were starting to pay attention to, right? Sam had won a car and had done, was kind of like working his way up the Magic food chain. And Sam was someone certainly coming into a format like Modern that you were keeping an eye on. Josh Utter-Leyton also in the top 8 as someone you were keeping an eye on. And anytime you're letting a deck builder loose in a new format, I think this is, Guillaume Matignon and Guillaume Wafatapa were players at this point where you're always looking to see what they're playing. And this is coming off of, this is the season coming off of the play-in for the Player of the Year title between Guillaume Matignon and Brad Nelson. And obviously Brad is someone that you're always paying attention to. But really the biggest news, right, like from a coverage perspective, the thing that you wanted to know was what was Channel Fireball doing? Well, what was Team CFB? What did they build? How did they do it? They had really transformed the way people approached competitive Magic. And it's weird to say that because, in the old days of the Pro Tour, there were certainly teams and big superstar teams, who would play test and prepare for these events. But, it was really fluid, right? And there wasn't the same staying power, right? This is all pre-Players Club. So, you were really there was some arcane system where you would string invitations together, right? But it was really hard to keep a top level team going from event to event.
And as someone whose task it was to tell the story of the event, is it almost better from that standpoint if that team continues their reign of terror, or if some plucky underdog team steals their thunder for this tournament?
I love a plucky underdog team, Dom. I am all about a plucky underdog team. The funny thing about the plucky underdog teams is you can talk about them every time, and then if one of them does it, right, that's great. It was I remember writing I think it was some piece of Japanese coverage, and we were just talking about a David and Goliath situation, where it was Tsuyoshi Fujita playing against someone playing in their first GP. I don't remember, I was setting up as David and Goliath, right? And I'm like, oh, but you forget before David got his match, Bob versus Goliath didn't work out that well. Sam versus Goliath, not so great. Jerry versus Goliath. Goliath, posted quite a track record, right? Before variance caught up with him with David.
Right. I don't have the background to make the New York sports analogies, which I'm sure are easy layups if anyone would be willing to take them. But the challenge that the players are facing now is modern. This crazy new format where all bets are off. No one has any idea what's going into it coming in. It's clearly exciting from a coverage standpoint for the viewers at home. But did you think that was going to favor the existing super teams? It was going to be a kind of rich get richer situation?
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. You just have to expect that, again, the teams that are putting in so much work and brain power and rigor into preparing for these events, they're just going to be able to crack the formula, right, for a new format.
Yeah, and it seems much more daunting as the PTQ winner who's trying to spike their one shot. If you don't have years and years of history here to draw on, you don't have a bunch of Magic Online data, and this is another thing too, which maybe is worth touching on, is not only was this a new format in the most true sense, but also it was a different information age almost, right? Where
absolutely. Twitter was pretty nascent, still, right? And you didn't have people streaming. There was still some sense of secrecy around decks going into an event.
Yeah, and insofar as there was information leakage, it was, the vendors are sold out of this, 2 hours before registration, right? But it wasn't the same.
That was a staple of coverage, right? Like, yes. What are the vendors sold out of?
Absolutely. But there wasn't quite the same dynamic. And in this era now of open deck lists, it feels like that has certainly a lot of logistical advantages, right? But that sense of anything could happen. You could sit down for your first Magic Constructed and be completely blindsided by what's going on. Some of that magic maybe has been lost there.
We forget how much revealed deck lists take out of the game. It was something to be at a tournament like this where it's like new format, no idea what my opponent's playing. They play an artifact land. Are they playing Affinity, or is this something that is it Krark-Clan Ironworks? I have no idea, right? I don't know if either deck is viable. Both decks would turn out to be viable eventually. But it was pretty cool.
And that's part of the fun, maybe, is you don't know if the deck that you've registered for this tournament is viable, right? You're kind of depending on what else is going on. But
yeah, you're kind of going on like last known information, like what was really broken 2 standards ago. What deck is from Extended is mostly legal, but with worse mana in this format, right?
Yeah. So with that in mind, give a sense, if you can, of what the mood in the room was like just going into those early rounds of the tournament.
There was so there's two different energies, right? Like, from most of my exposure is going to be to the coverage team and the preparation for the event, right? And so on our side, there's just a ton of excitement because this is a media event, right? There's all these players that we're tracking. Is Rookie of the Year Sebastian Thaler gonna make the leap? Is Jeremy Neiman the next Paulo Vitor Damarosa, right? All of the different players that you're sort of tracking and following and looking to see if they're gonna have their big breakthrough event. But also, new format decks, et cetera. So it's very exciting. I think there was a lot of nervous energy on the player side.
As the tournament unfolds and you see what people are playing, you get the full metagame breakdown. Did it roughly align with what you all had in mind, or was there some big surprise that you and the players out there maybe had not anticipated?
I think the big surprise for me was probably the deck that Sam Black played. I remember loving seeing, Josh Utter-Leyton play Countercat, right? Which is, I think, what we called the deck, right? It was like kind of like a zoo deck that had some sort of, control. It was kind of the Merfolk deck of the tournament, right? It was like some cheap creatures and some amount of counter spells or some kind of control. And it just seemed like such an unlikely deck for someone like Josh to be playing.
And in the context of that tournament, Josh, who is one of the best players in the world on the best team in the world at that time, he almost feels like the David to the Goliath in the room, right? Where everyone else is doing these absurd, degenerate things, and he's playing Wildner Cattle and casting counterspells and so on. He is the good guy somehow. But sticking with the David versus Goliath framing in a different context, so you have the big names who everyone's excited to see how well they do coming into the event. And then you also have the people who are trying to make a name for themselves for the first time. So I spoke to Josh Hakakian as part of this process, and he did the deck with you. Tragically lost back-to-back win innings to miss that top 8 there, but really in contention towards the end there. And I imagine
what was the deck he was playing? I remember that.
Yeah, he was playing Twin, so Twin goes on to win the event, but sadly not in his hands. And I imagine if video coverage of the first 2 days had existed at that point, this is the one tournament you really won that for, right? And I imagine his run would have been part of that. But he said that looking back at the event now, at the time and now 10 years on, just getting a chance to be in that spotlight, having that discussion with you and you kind of asking him what his story was, that stands out as one of his fondest memories of his entire time playing Magic. And so did you feel a kind of not a responsibility, but an opportunity to kind of make people's tournaments and make people's careers in that sense?
Absolutely. It's one of the things I love most about the job. I never loved being in the booth, right? Oh, okay. I never loved that. I never really wanted to do that. I really liked talking about Magic, but not necessarily talking about games of Magic. So I loved talking about the players. I loved, one of the things I always remember, the Team Pro Tour that Kajuhari won. Mm-hmm. But Paulo's team finishes second, and it's the first big finish for Paulo. And I remember talking to someone about Paulo, and they're like, well, Paulo's done pretty well before, it's not like came out of nowhere. I'm like, really? Let me, I know his name. I remember he'd been writing for Mind Ripper to just summon all the old website names. And, so I look up his, went back 4 or 5 Pro Tours, and, I was like, holy cow, this guy's got a top 24. He's got a top 18. He's got a top 35. It was like, this is pretty impressive, right? And now he's got a second. And being like, guys, we need to pay attention to this guy, right? We need to talk about this guy. We need to build this up, right? This is someone who's flying here from Brazil. It's this crazy trip to get here. And we need to make sure that someone who's gone through these lengths and had the success that he's had, not just the second place, but, sort of continuing to qualify himself for these events by coming to event after event and doing well, right? That's something we need to talk about. And, it's really moving for me when I retired from doing coverage. One of the tweets that just killed me, just made me cry, was from Paulo's mother, who both doesn't have Twitter or didn't have Twitter and doesn't speak English, who tweeted about me taking that time to talk about Paulo's accomplishments and to build Paulo up and to, sort of give him some celebrity and some additional spotlight so that maybe other opportunities come, right? And even if you're not, we all know, even if you're not necessarily winning a ton of money playing Magic, some notoriety also tends to bring other opportunities that allow you to continue to support your hobby and be able to put in that week in the playtesting house with CFB, right? Because you've got you're getting an extra for your column or for your videos or for whatever. So, that was really meaningful. So, which is a very long answer to say, yeah, that is something that was very important to me. On a Thursday before a Pro Tour, I would camp myself out at the top of the stairs to the hall as people were coming in. And you'd see people that and it's always like, hey. But in general, if somebody was coming to their first Pro Tour,
Now, obviously, I'm not going to recognize them coming to the first Pro Tour, but they generally would recognize me.
Absolutely.
And they would come over and start talking to me. And I really, it was always very important to me to acknowledge people's performance, right? So yes, Josh came really close to making the top 8 there, and that was a great finish. Day 2, he deserves an accolade. But that person coming up the stairs to the Pro Tour and qualifying for a Pro Tour, right? And just getting to be there for the first time. I also generally wanted to acknowledge that accomplishment for people, because I know how hard that is. I've done it. It's really difficult. And I know I have friends and people that I've known for a long time who've spent their whole lives trying to qualify for the Pro Tour and weren't able to do it despite being very good Magic players. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of levels of accomplishment in Magic that if you're not LSD, sometimes it can be a little brutal, right? You can be hard on yourself. And I always wanted people to take a moment and sort of appreciate the accomplishment at each level.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that after, 20 or 30 Pro Tours, whichever side of that curtain you're on, it can all start to blur together in the end, right? Whereas if this is, if you've had 1 or 2 shots, and especially if this is your first Pro Tour, right, that first PT means so much, and being able to be part of that experience for someone has to be really, really validating and really heartwarming. And it seems like in this day and age, it's much easier for people to make a name for themselves, whether it's via Twitter or Twitch or writing in various places or independent tournament circuits. If you want to make a name for yourself in Magic, it's still a lot of work, but it's possible, right? And there are lots of ways of doing that. But back in this era, as you say, Twitter was very young at this point. Magic streaming on Twitch did not really exist in the same way yet.
I don't even think it was called Twitch yet, right? Wasn't it called like Justin TV?
Yes. Yeah. Blip, all of the favorites from back in the day. It seemed like someone in your role being able to elevate people like that was even much more important then than it may have been nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. I going back a season, I still remember tracking Brad's progress before Pro Tour Hawaii. Brad Nelson. And I didn't even know Brad's name. I knew FF Freak was just tearing up Block Constructed going into that Block Constructed Pro Tour. And so I made a point of talking about him, finding out who he was, tracking him down at the Grand Prix before the Pro Tour, and then, talking about him at the Pro Tour. And I had actually, as it turns out, done an interview with him at Nationals years before when he went 7-0 Unlimited, but that's which given Brad's history with Constructed, it's kind of funny that the first time he gets coverage is 7-0 Unlimited. But I remember talking to Brad, and he ended up getting featured against Scott-Vargas in round 1 of that Pro Tour, and then played a win in one of the last rounds, or oh no, we were going to do a deck tech on day 2. And he's like, I'm really not comfortable, being on camera. And I'm like, look, here's the deal. It sucks the first time you're on camera, but you're going to come on camera. You're going to do a deck tech. You're going to be great. You're going to tell people things about this format that they don't know. They're going to get better at Magic. You are going to get better at being on camera. And before you know it, you'll be writing Magic articles and doing Magic videos, and you'll have an opportunity to support yourself while you play Magic, doing more than just playing Magic. Right? And I remember that conversation distinctly, and I don't think there's ever been a moment in my life where I've been more correct. Right? Because, Brad has become such a media empire unto himself in the intervening years, right?
So coming out of that Sunday where you have Samuel Estrada hoisting the trophy, did it seem like this modern experiment had been a success? And what was the kind of standout memory from the tournament at that time, just as it was wrapping up?
Definitely seemed like it was a success, right? Like it was a pretty, I think if you come out of that event and there's no cards that you want banned, then the new format was probably a little underwhelming. And I think it felt successful, right? It felt like there were a bunch of different decks and a bunch of different things, and that's cool. But I think the memory of the tournament to me just has to be Sam digging through his deck, right? For all of those, cantrips and all of those pure through depths and all of those, blue cards to go find his Blazing Shoal, that he just needed to win. It was insane, right? It was just one of those moments where you're like, well, he's clearly, what percentage of his deck is he looking at, right? The odds here are so in his favor that he's just going to find exactly what he needs. And it felt almost inevitable. And as that inevitability kind of like lost its finger hold on the moment, right? It was pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
And like when you say, there's two things. I remember that, and then I remember meeting Nate and Sean from Walking the Plains, which was not yet called Walking the Plains. That was their first piece of video content, was at that event. And I remember Nate introducing himself to me, and then shooting some stuff in the feature match area. So I think of Philadelphia. I think of Sam kind of futilely digging through his deck for the one piece that he needs. And then I think about Nate and Sean, and, two local guys, two local to Philadelphia, kind of getting to then travel the world and meet everybody in the world of Magic, from the artists to the game designers to the top pros, which I think is another pretty remarkable aspect of Magic, right? Aside from just excelling as a player, right? Excelling as a content creator.
The Sam anecdote, I think, really highlights how contingent a lot of our memories of these events and a lot of these moments in people's careers are, right? Where if Sam hits the 90% and then wins that match and maybe wins another match, it's not 3 top 8s anymore. It's 3 top 8s with a win for the Hall of Fame discussions and so on and so forth.
The thing that you remember when you start talking about people are the trophy shots, right? You remember them holding the trophy. You remember them, letting out that giant burst of energy that's been coiled up for 3 days because they finally won. So it's could be a very different history for Sam.
Yeah, it's always one of the more complicated feelings I have watching the coverage when someone that they win and their friends flood into the feature match area to like hoist them above in the air, and then the other person is just quietly packing up their cards and shuffling their way out of the area, and it really like that should matter, right? And you want it to matter. That's why we're all here. But at the same time, it's got to be so crushing for the person on the wrong end of that.
Oh, sure. I mean, I am, you talk about, sports anchors, right? Like I always hate when they show the other team, right? Like whether it's the Super Bowl or the World Series or the NBA championship, and then they show the same thing, the exultant, champions, and then cut to, grizzled veteran on the bench, maybe played in his last NBA season, kind of gently sobbing on the sideline, right? And it's like, oh, don't show me that. Oh, it was the Paulo and Andre Strosky match where Andre won, and Paulo kind of like shakes his hands, kind of like moves away, but then like regroups and then like rejoins as a supporter. Like it's this like really crazy little loop-de-loop.
Yeah. Bringing all of this full circle then, so as the Pro Tour historian, right, once upon a time, very
Pro
much...
Tour historian emeritus, they said I could keep that as my title.
Yes, in perpetuity, yeah. Very much enjoyed reading the oral history you did of the first Pro Tour, way back when, in the day. Would highly recommend anyone check that out. But as, you've seen the history of the game and the Pro Tour evolve over the years, as is go-to historian, what would you say is crucial for a project like this, or for someone who's trying to tell the story of an event, especially an event that they maybe were not an integral part of themselves? Like, what do you think is the right attitude to approach that with?
It's for me, it's about finding out a little bit of like bursting balloons a little bit. Like in the oral history that I did for Pro Tour 1, I loved all the stuff with Michael Lecanto where he just talks about being like, hey, I was drunk and I started bothering Richard Garfield, told him I was going to win the event, right? And it's like just taking a little wind out of the sails of sort of the, demystifying it a little bit and making it feel human. And Magic players are so, no Magic player's ever been nervous in a top 8 if you talk to a Magic player, right? It's no different. I play exactly the same as if I'm in the top 8 or if I'm in round 1. I don't, bullshit, right? Let's be honest. People, I've watched great players freeze in the moment, right? I've watched them not play with the same flow that they have when they're playing without thinking about what things mean for their legacy, right? And getting people to talk about those moments, right? Like talk about those things where, sometimes you have a very real emotion about it and it affects you, right? It propels you or it holds you back, or I don't know. I think just capturing those stories about that experience and taking a little bit of the shine off of the mythology is I think a fun way to do it.
So that was BDM, a real treat to talk to, and I give him a lot of credit for trying to elevate so many voices across the years. One of those voices, as we alluded to there, was Josh Hakakian, and for good reason, as you're about to find out. So I'm joined now by Josh Hakakian, and in the course of finding interviewees for this process, obviously we go to the people in the top 8, we go to some of the known community figures, but we're also looking for other perspectives from the tournament. And Josh, in you, we have someone who was so agonizingly close to that top 8, and in the process, you built up maybe the underdog story or the Cinderella story of this tournament here.
I think that has to be accurate. Of all the people in the top 8, most of them are pretty well established, and I think my last maybe 8 rounds, at least my last 6 rounds were all very well known professional players.
Yeah, so you ended up going through this murderous row on day 2 with the top 8 in sight. And most of those players either had at the time already 10 years ago and have accumulated more of it since. They have a lot of experience playing at the highest level, but you didn't coming into this event. So give us a brief introduction into your background as a competitive player coming into Pro Tour Philadelphia. How you qualified, what your expectations were, and just that kind of stuff in general.
Sure. So I've been playing Magic since Tempest was released and 5th edition. Not all the way back, but far enough back that, we still had Dark Rituals labeled as mana sources, and we didn't have a stack. So I went through a lot of the iterations with the rest of the community as all the different changes went through Magic, from rules changes to border changes to foils being introduced, all the really broken decks like, memory jar decks, Illusions Donate, Necropotence being legal for far longer than anyone really expected to be. So I've seen an awful lot, and I've played in qualifiers throughout, that whole time. Shortly after getting involved, maybe within a year, I realized that, there was a competitive scene, and it really interested me. And I was awful. And, as one usually does, over 10, 15 years, you improve. Especially when you play as much as I did. I played every day for hours. I qualified for one Pro Tour up to that point. It was Pro Tour Hollywood, and I just bombed out of that one pretty quickly. But I had a great time in California. So going into this event, a friend of mine played at the local regionals back when we still had regionals, and he played Eldrazi Green. And this was in the era of Callblade and Stoneforge Mystic, right? So, and Jace the Mind Sculptor. So he sent me his list, but when he sent me this list, which he qualified for nationals with, he top 8'd with, I play tested it extensively for a few weeks, and I made some significant changes. So I took the deck to Dream Wizards in Maryland for a PTQ, I just stomped the tournament. I actually, I won the PTQ without taking a game loss on the day. It was very validating because it had been so long since I was able to qualify for a Pro Tour. I didn't get to go to a lot of events like a lot of these people, my friends, they would even travel to Grand Prix, and I just never really had that opportunity between work and school. So I was very excited.
Let's get into that late switch of the tournament format to mod.
So I think, honestly, my first impression was disappointment. I loved Extended. I played Extended back when Dual Lands and Force of Will was legal in Extended. Even after they rotated sets out of Extended, they kept Dual Lands in because the player base loved them so much and they were so important at the time. So I was just kind of devastated that the format wasn't going to be what I was excited about. And then my first thought was, oh, great. The entire format is going to be Thoughtseize, Bitter Blossom, Mental Misstep, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Stoneforge Mystic. Without really any preparation, they just kind of windmill slammed these cards, which was great in some capacity, right? Like, nobody wanted to play a format with all of those cards legal.
Going into this tournament then, was there something in the back of your mind saying, there's got to be something broken here? There's got to be something I've missed that some genius in this tournament is going to have, and I just have to hope that that's not such bad news for me?
Yes. I think that, especially as you mentioned before, with these super teams preparing, it's impossible for something not ridiculous to come about, which is one of the reasons I was so skeptical about playing such a fair combo deck. But day 2 is when I started, that's probably when I started seeing more of the interesting decks.
And so coming out of that second draft on day 2, you're in the home stretch now. It's all modern from here, and you start to see the top 8 in sight. What was the point where you said that you thought, all right, this is something that could really actually happen to me now?
I think the first time I realized the top 8 was in sight was I realized that even though I took a loss to Josh Utter-Leyton, it looked like, based on my tie breaks, if I won my next round, I could ID into the top 8. But that's when I sat down against Estradi. And that was also my first mirror match of the day, of the event, excuse me. I was late to this round because BDM had pulled me aside for a deck tech and an interview, and I was just ecstatic on cloud 9. He walks up, he's just like, he starts off the conversation with, "So Josh," he kind of looks around and shrugs his shoulders. He goes, "What's your story, man?" And that was definitely the highlight of my entire time playing Magic. It was never about qualifying. It wasn't about the prizes. It was having an esteemed figure who I've actually talked to before, but recognized me on a professional level, and that was absolutely, without question, the most amazing moment of my Magic playing career.
Yeah, it's easy to forget now, but this is the year before we started to see regular coverage of the Pro Tours, of the GPs and such on Twitch. And so, unless you made the top 8 of the event or you already were a known figure in the community, the only way really that your story was going to get out there, or that the community at large would become aware of you, is if someone like BDM sought you out to highlight you. And that's something which I know when BDM stepped away from that role a few years later, that was one of the most common things you heard across the board, from established players to people who maybe just played a single Pro Tour, is the fact that he took an interest in me and tried to, understand my story and then broadcast my story. That meant so much more than just, winning this match at this time or anything like that.
Absolutely. And especially him. He's been there since the beginning. And to have someone of that sort of caliber and notoriety take some time to do something like that with me, it's indescribable. And the day, like you had said, a few years later when he stopped doing coverage, the day that I saw it on Facebook, I read through all the comments. I left one myself, and the number of people, it sounds like, looking at it from an outside standpoint, it might sound trivial to someone who really doesn't understand that all of these people through 2 decades at that point had connected with this guy who used to be part of Neutral Ground. I believe, way back in the day, and used to be part of like all these different steps and things that have gone and grown with the game. All of these people have connected with him, and he's made a difference or an impact with all of them. Now, it's whether it's some sort of mentorship or whether it's some sort of friendship or whether it's just something like what I got to experience with him, which is just a few minutes, that's my 15 minutes of quote fame, with a deck tech and a feature match and a short interview with Brian David Marshall. It really left a significant impact. That was the time where I felt like I made it, not necessarily as a success in Magic, but as part of the community. And that was that feeling of inclusivity made more of an impact than even just playing at the Pro Tour. And I don't know if that's kind of when I let my guard down, because I felt like I got there, but I don't think so. Like, a lot of people will say things like, you don't want to focus on making the top 8. You want to focus on winning the event, or you don't want to focus on 3-0ing your draft. You want to focus on XOing your day 2 or something like that. Like, you always want to focus on something higher, because a lot of times people believe that when they succeed in that first step, it dooms them to not succeed in whatever the following one is. And so, but I can't imagine that's actually the case here. I just wanted to show up, enjoy my experience, and play the best of my ability. Making top 8 would have obviously been great. Winning the tournament would obviously be great, but I knew that when that happened, it was going to take winning the tournament to potentially top that moment.
So after that, you go for your feature match with Estradi. He wins, goes into top 8, win the entire thing himself. You now have one more shot at it, right? You have back-to-back win-and-ins. So you go for your next round. You lose that one as well, and it seems like the top 8 dream is dead. What are you going through at that moment? What's going on inside there?
It wasn't as devastating as one would imagine, because at that point, like I said, I'd already felt like I had success. I played the best of my ability. I made some small mistakes, and the small mistakes are what really differentiate you in such a high caliber field. I made the mistakes. Estradi didn't. I wasn't prepared. My last round opponent was, and a little bit of variance through the tournament, but honestly, much less than it wasn't as bad for me as it could have been. So, like, all in all, I was really I was just very happy with being able to be there, being able to play at that level with well-established people. I was ecstatic. Everyone wants to win when they show up. No one wants to go in and narrowly miss multiple times. But man, what a day. What an event. That you couldn't beat it. Especially someone like myself. This is my second Pro Tour. And I got to meet and interview with Brian David Marshall. I got to play against and beat most of the best players in the world that I played against. A couple of them got me. It happens. It's a game with variance and, like I said, preparation and skill level. So ultimately, I was just ecstatic I got to be a part of it, and I couldn't have asked for a better day. If all the matches were going to go the same way they went, it couldn't have possibly been better.
And did it put your later engagement with the game in a different perspective? When you come so close and now you're going back into the trenches, so to speak, you might qualify for another Pro Tour, let's say, however long that takes, and it's going to be so hard even to get back to those lofty heights that you've got to already.
I think that's a very interesting question. I didn't look at it that way. If anything, I felt like this was validation. When I got to play this event and had this modicum of success, I just felt like it was very validating. Like, yeah, I can be here. I can play with these guys. I made some mistakes. I wasn't as prepared, and that's why I didn't, continue on to rise higher. But those are things that can be fixed. Those are things that I've identified in the process. So it wasn't like, anything is really holding me back from being successful except continuing to dedicate myself to something I really just love doing and finding opportunities in order to make that happen.
And over the years, as you say, other commitments come up and you can't play as much of the game as maybe you would like to, or your relationship with it changes. Do you ever find yourself looking back and thinking, if I just won one more match, or is there anything like that? Or is it, if anything, did that initial reaction of, hey, I'm just glad I had this amazing experience, has that only cemented itself as the years have gone by?
It has only made me more grateful for that opportunity, because not everyone gets to do that. Not everyone who loves this game gets to do that. And everyone who, people don't play Magic because they want to win money. They don't play Magic because they want to travel. Although, the bonus is you potentially get to do both. People play Magic because they love the game and they enjoy the community that it brings. So the years that I really dedicated myself to it, I just had so much fun with it and met so many people that were just genuine good people. And I met some people I really didn't like, but, I was in the military and I traveled a fair amount, between the two coasts, and I still have friends, on both coasts and throughout the middle. And nearly all of those friends I made by playing Magic. So it's allowed me to, sort of branch out, be social, and build relationships that I wouldn't have had otherwise. The fact that I had even this amount of success in doing something that I was already going to do anyway, it's just so wonderful, So looking back on it, do I wish I won another match? Sure. It would have been great. I think I ended up, winning $2,000 or $3,000, and it could have been 50, or 30. I don't remember the price at that point. That would have been awesome. Who doesn't want to do that? But no, I can't possibly look back with regrets. That's no way. Now, in the meantime, so I played in Worlds, didn't go great. I wasn't prepared. Again, same old story. But I had a great time in California. And, over the years, things have changed so much, but the game itself is still the same. I don't really play competitively anymore, although after having this talk with you and sort of reminiscing, I'm feeling like that fire might be back for a little bit.
You got the itch.
I really do, I'm not going to lie. But as excited and thrilled and honored as I was to talk with BDM, I'm also very excited and thrilled and honored that you reached out to me and asked me from my perspective on this, on the game that I loved, and I never really I always sought success, and I never really found it in some level, but in a lot of ways I really did, and so thank you.
I'm not going to lie, I got a little emotional there at the end as I was talking to Josh in real time, and then again as I was listening back to piece all of this together. I'm going to take a short break to collect my thoughts, and then we will be back with Nathan Holt.
Alright folks, we're taking a brief time out here to talk about STG Premium, and for the low price of just $7.99 a month, which is less than the cost of one collector booster, by the way, here's what you get. 5% off sealed product, 10% off singles, 15% off supplies, and that's everything from sleeves, deck boxes, to binders, and so much more. If you're making a big order to get ready for Paper Magic again, that month of premium just paid for itself. On top of that, you get more content and better content than anywhere else at the best prices. If you're here now with me and Ari, and you like what you hear, you can get our weekly columns, but that's only the start. How about the literal world champion, and for my money, the best player of all time, Paulo Vitor Damagerosa? How about Pro Tour champions and Mythic champions, from Joey Thompson to Autumn Burchett? We have the best standard player of all time, perhaps, in Brad Nelson, and the best limited mind in the game right now in Sam Black, and so much more. And if one piece of advice from any of us helps you win just one more round in a tournament, well, that month of premium just paid for itself many times over. Get the best discounts and the best content over at starcitygames.com/join-premium.
Welcome back for this final segment here in part one. The end is in sight, at least for now. And for this final segment, is someone who I am proud to call a friend, and who I'm sure is familiar to all of you, the great Nathan Holt. All right, and to round this out, I am joined by the one and only Nathan Holt, who was not a participant at Pro Tour Philadelphia, but who, despite that, may have seen his life and career path change maybe more than any other person who was in the room that day as a result of that event. So thank you for joining me, first of all. Give us a brief introduction to yourself for the people who might not be aware, and then a rundown of where you were, I suppose, as a Magic player and just in life back in the summer of 2011.
Yeah, so my name's Nathan Holt. Right now, I'm a political organizer in Philadelphia for electoral campaigns. For 7 years, I worked for Wizards of the Coast in coverage of Pro Tours and other events, and made original content for them in a web series called Walking the Plains. And then later in a documentary series that I produced called Enter the Battlefield, which also had a feature-length documentary on Netflix for a few years. So all of that, all the coverage that I got to do, it was my full-time job for 7 years, and all of that was because of Pro Tour Philadelphia in 2011. So, you know, I know Samuele Estrati won the Pro Tour and the $40,000 check that came with it and some pro player club status. But my collaborator, Sean Kornhauser, and I feel like we really won that Pro Tour because we had 7 years of professional life, basically from the spark that was ignited, so to speak, at that Pro Tour.
Yeah, the tagline for so long was play the game, see the world, and you were playing the game in one sense. You weren't playing it in the tournament necessarily, but you still got to see the world and do so much more as a result, unexpectedly, of everything that came out of that one event.
That's true. I was not a competitor in the main event. However, I had some not too shabby matches in the side events in the drafts. This was back when they actually had public side events for members of the general public who wanted to come watch. Later, the Pro Tour would batten the hatches, so to speak, and it was invite only or players in their plus ones, no more public events. But that was another unique thing about that. So I played as a casual, not as a competitor in the main event. I did not win any Pro Tour qualifier, but we were there to cover all the action, talk to the Magic stars, the Magic pros, people who I was immense fans of, meeting for the first time, you know, feeling nervous. My collaborator, Sean, always made fun of me for basically melting into the floor like a shy middle school student around people like Brad Nelson and, John Finkel and Sam Black and folks like that. So, it was, it was a big Pro Tour, and, you know, like you said, play the game, see the world was the mantra for so long. But for us, that was our hometown event, and I would never have gone if it hadn't happened in the city in which I was living at the time.
Yeah, it's weird to think that had this been Pro Tour Pittsburgh or something, then there's maybe no Walking the Plains, no Enter the Battlefield, and so this is one of those butterfly effect moments. Your story may actually be one of the best counter arguments or counter examples for why closing off the Pro Tour in that way was maybe a mistake for so long, where interested members of the public, however ambitious their goals may have been, don't get to experience that and then go off and do their own thing.
That's right. I think that is right. And it's funny you mentioned, I think if it was Pro Tour Pittsburgh, none of it happens. A lot of it was being in the right place at the right time. To give you a contrast, I probably had more access to players and filming in the feature match area at that Pro Tour, having had no affiliation with Magic whatsoever, and having come in with like a amateur press badge, or we got a press badge, which is its own funny story, from Wizards. I had more access to players in space and the studio at that time than I did by the last episode of Walking the Plains. They kind of just, made it more and more and more controlled and restricted access to things. even amongst their own contractors and coverage, which was, that's a whole other story. But at that time, it was crazy. We waltzed right in. I'm wearing a T-shirt and jeans, with a little press badge, just walking right up into, John Finkel's personal space in the feature match areas, playing high-stakes Pro Tour match. It was wild. And we got those press badges for a very funny quid pro quo with Wizards at the time. This is at the Philadelphia Convention Center. At the time, upstairs from the Pro Tour, there was a cat convention, as in cat lovers and professional cat breeders showing off their beautiful and crazy and unusual cats at the convention center. And because Zoo was a popular modern deck at this first Modern Pro Tour starring Wild Nacatl, Wizards wanted to get photos at the cat convention. So we had a friend of ours hook them up with a press badge for the cat convention, and in exchange, we got a press badge for the Pro Tour. It's funny to think that if even a different deck was, in Brian Kibler's hands or whatever at that Pro Tour, maybe we don't get that press badge. So all kinds of butterfly type stuff, as you mentioned.
So going into that, what was your background in content creation, I guess, for lack of a more specific phrase? Did you have any kind of theatrical background, any kind of, had you done similar stuff in this space, or was this just an amateur project of your own?
So I did have a theatrical background from high school to college, where I majored in theater, and then I was a professional stage actor and theater artist, amateurish producer. Music, we did some hip hop, comedy, sketch comedy, improv comedy, Shakespeare, basically all stuff on the stage. I didn't have a background in internet content creation. And in 2011, it was a very different landscape than it is now. But a good friend of mine, whose name is Sean Kornhauser, and who co-created Walking the Plains with me and such, he and I had made some experimental artsy type videos, including, speaking of cats, a condensed version of Shakespeare's Othello where everybody was dressed up as a cat. So this was an idea. He had moved back to Philly after a hiatus, and said he wanted to do a new project. And I said, well, I'm a big fan of Magic. I played Magic for years. And there's a professional tournament coming to Philadelphia. We should just show up with a camera and just kind of goof off. And it was 100% amateur. We didn't script anything. We were just really improvising on camera, kind of cracking jokes, talking to the players. We, did this silly thing where I spoke German to Simon Götz, and
yes,
just really silly stuff. We never thought anything would come of it. I was showing up to the shoot on 2 hours of sleep, having bartended all night. I worked at an after hours club that was open till 6 a.m. It was not professional at all, but it was at a time when Wizards didn't have much video coverage. I mean, they really only broadcast the top 8 of Pro Tours, not each round. They didn't have a whole lot of supplemental content. This was, at a time when video content was in a very different place. 720p, quote, high resolution video was brand new at that time on YouTube, and I think played a role in why we were able to get people's attention. The reason we got into it is not because of the professionalism we brought to it, but because there was a viral video that people traced back to our content and said, Magic needs more of this. And sort of the internet just told Wizards, in long Twitter threads and Reddit posts and other media, that they wanted us to be hired by Wizards. The people just kind of demanded it, and both Sean and I were looking for opportunities at the time, so we jumped on it.
Yeah, it seems like, if anything, it was not the lack of professionalism, but the fact that it wasn't slick and it wasn't overly produced. It wasn't built with a certain goal in mind. It was just one local fan's love of the game, and that really shone through.
That's right. I mean, in my interview with John Finkel, I've met him, and then 10 seconds later, I'm asking him about how he went on a date, and then she snubbed him in an interview to the press, later. So that's the kind of thing that Wizards usually wouldn't touch, but also because a lot of interviewers might have been more inhibited around John than to ask him about his dating life.
What were you expecting when you walked in that building? Because, as you say, at the time, there wasn't really video coverage to speak of, both from WotC and then also independently. So maybe you get a glimpse of the box off feature match area every now and then, and the matches going on in there. But you don't know what the tournament itself is like, what the feel of the tournament is like. Maybe you see some of your favorite players on camera, but you don't really know them as people. And as you said earlier, this is a very different time in terms of, Twitter and YouTube and just players being able to market themselves and get themselves across. So what were you expecting just from the experience as you walked inside the convention center?
Well, I think you make a really good point. I didn't know what to expect. And, Wizards never covered it. I mean, they really only showed, top 8 matches at that time in the studio at the feature match. And I think that's one of the reasons why people liked it so much, is because nobody knew what these events were like in person, and we had a camera on the floor. And it's not a revolutionary idea or anything. If you watch sports, you have your broadcasters and commentators that are in the booth commentating on the action as it happens, but then you've got your sideline reporters who are doing interviews with players or coaches, or kind of, getting the camera down on the field or courtside or whatever it is, to give the viewer a feel of what it's like down there, where the fans are all around screaming out and whatnot. So the fact that we were able to showcase the whole tournament environment, I think helped give fans at home and viewers a sense of, oh, okay, that's what it's like at a Magic tournament. And then, I had people say to me like, oh, yeah, one of the reasons why I went to a Magic tournament for the first time is, we watched your videos and it just looked like a fun place. And, so I think that was definitely a key feature of it.
Did it feel like it was a high stakes event? This is the marquee event in the professional calendar, or was it almost more laid back than it seemed like it should have been?
Well, I think the answer is both. So, when I got there, I mean, myself giggling over Brad Nelson aside, I mean, it's a pretty chill environment. It's not like going to a rock concert or something. It's like, it's just if you've been to your local Magic store, it was just like that, only much larger, just lots of tables with people sitting, playing Magic. It's not, people aren't tearing the place apart. But it also did feel like a really big deal, and especially because this was the first Modern Pro Tour, and Modern was a brand new format. Nobody knew what the pro players would do to crack the format, and so everybody was watching very keenly.
And so when your video hits the internet, I suppose, it gets condensed down into this very kind of fast-moving 7 or 8 minute extravaganza. How much did you record there, and how much did you have to kind of leave stuff on the cutting room floor? What was the actual recording and editing process like for you for that very first piece of content there?
So, normally when a video production unit shoots, they shoot way, way, way more than they need. And then the process is finding these needles in the haystack. For us, that's what our work eventually became, as we became more and more professional and went to more and more pro tours. We got lots of content and really had to, Sean, who was my collaborator, he had to sift through just hours and hours of stuff. But for this video at Pro Tour Philadelphia, I mean, like I said, I was on 2 hours of sleep. You know, we had scheduling differences. We barely had enough stuff to put together a video. And a lot of what we had done was all in just one take. I mean, we didn't do multiple takes of our jokes or, of our interviews. I didn't want to bother these pro players for too long, so we're doing short little 4 and 5 minute interviews, as opposed to when I was official coverage and we would sit down with them for a long time at scheduled times where, Wizards had accommodated that. But yeah, that Pro Tour Philly video, I mean, we were lucky that we had enough to make something that looked coherent.
So take me through the process from that video being published and you kind of are already starting to forget about it a little bit maybe, to suddenly this takes off and now other people are interested and now WotC is interested and this gets parlayed into a whole bigger thing. What was all of that like from your perspective?
So, I mean, it was pretty wild. Even though it was this amateur effort, I cared so much because I loved Magic and I played Magic all the time. And I followed the Pro Tour. So my hopes and dreams were tied up in this. Like I said, at the time, I was a bartender and a stage actor. And, I was sort of bouncing back and forth between having full-time acting work to needing to rely on these other gigs, work at the baseball stadium or whatever. Sean was very low income at the time and was on the verge of needing to sell all his cameras to pay his rent. I mean, we were starving artists, in our 20s. But so I was eager for it to be some success just for my soul. But then the reason it got popular is because we had this one shot that Sean got in the feature match area of Brian Kibler shuffling his hand. Kibler took this to a whole other level where it looked like he was juggling the cards in his hand. I mean,
hypnotizing. Yeah.
Absolutely hypnotizing. You couldn't even tell what was happening, physically, even with the photographic footage right in front of you. And it was this long shot and it was just really, I don't know what it was, but people found it really funny and sort of without any commentary either. It was a unnarrated shot of someone shuffling their hand. And so then Evan Irwin made a 30-second clip with the song Every Day I'm Shuffling. So there was this hit song that summer and it was just paired with that. And that video went very viral. And then people said, where was that from? So they found our video secondarily. And then there was this whole, holy crap, you guys have to keep making Magic videos. So then we used Kickstarter at the time because we didn't have $2,000 of our own discretionary funds at the time. But we got these supporters, which included a bunch of pro players who wanted us to be there, so, and that was enough money for us to fly to San Francisco and make a video at the World Championship. And then after, that was a much more comprehensive, way more footage, longer video, more of an all-out effort where we tried to be professional. And that was kind of our audition tape, where after that we told Wizards, okay, well, we're kind of done, but, they were interested in bringing us on, but we were well, we can't, do that for free. We would need to be hired by coverage. So they wanted to make it happen. So they picked us up for 12 or 15 episode season or something like that.
Can you talk about the nature of that collaboration with Sean Kornhauser? Because I think if you watch those videos, you come across as the voice and the face of the production a lot of the time, and Sean is the guy kind of making everything happen behind the scenes, behind the camera, and so on. Which, of course, that's a bit reductive, but it's easy to kind of get that impression, I suppose. What was the backstory for the two of you guys collaborating on stuff like this, and what was it that made that partnership just tick in the way it did?
Well, Sean is one of my closest friends. At the time when we started this, we were like casual friends. You know, we had hung out a bit together and we'd done some cool projects together. But, you know, now he's like one of my closest friends. He's a genius. You know, people did see me, you know, and they just kind of assumed it was my show and my series because I was the one that was on camera and doing the voiceover and everything. But, you know, it doesn't happen without Sean. I mean, we were two people basically doing the work of what, you know, say 5 or 6 people would do in a bare bones skeleton crew video production unit. Sean is like capturing sound and video, you know, at the same time, like it, which, you know, it is kind of crazy for the scope and the quality standards we had for our work. He is creative. He is a visual artist. He draws these pencil drawings that are just like absolutely incredible in photorealism. Like he has a degree in fine arts. He did attend film school at the Savannah College of Art and Design. I knew he was a creative genius, and we had just such different and complementary strengths that's why it worked. You know, I was the performer. I was the comedy writer. I, you know, was more connected to the game of Magic, at least at first. You know, Sean had never really played when we started doing this. Yeah, we made a great team, professionally. And the fact that we were personally friends as well and were able to maintain that through a work collaborative environment, is, you know, difficult and special.
Of the two of you, you were the main on-camera performer, if you like. But one thing that, again, differentiates your content from all the others, really, is that in many cases, your guests, your interview subjects, were also roped in as performers for these bits. You know, they were as much part of the action as anyone else. And of course, you always had your Brian Kiblers who were naturals in front of the camera, or your Mark Rosewaters who used to be comedy writers and now he's suggesting bits himself, and it's a whole, you know, he's the third man in the process. But there's always been this stereotype or this stigma almost of the Magic player as the kind of more withdrawn, maybe more socially introverted or awkward or so on. And so did you ever have trouble kind of coaxing out that kind of participation or getting people to feel comfortable with your especially kind of fun and goofy brand of interviewing?
Yeah, you know, it's like there were obviously different levels of challenge. Some folks are very comfortable on camera. I will say this. If you take your average person, you know, just normal, ordinary folks, most people become very uncomfortable when you put a camera on them and a microphone in their face and ask them a question and ask them to say their answer in a sentence or less. You know, these are not long form formats, you know, such as a podcast. This was like, you're on the spot. You know, we need a 10-second soundbite. Go. You know, I would say your average person it feels uncomfortable, but can push through that. I do think that a lot of folks struggle with that. And, you know, a lot of Magic players are introverted. Not all of them, not all of us. But, you know, it's true. There are a lot of software engineers and computer scientists, on the Pro Tour. You know, the part of our job, and I think why Wizards liked what we did, was that we were able to help some of these players out of their comfort zone. And it helps that if I am the silly one, and then you always get to be the straight man, you know, so that you get to react to me. And, you know, if anybody looks dumb or stupid or whatever, it's me. And I think that helped people relax a bit, and open up. But absolutely there is a challenge. I mean, there were sketches where I was like try, 10 takes or whatever to get a certain pro player to say a line, some kind of way that would come across. But by and large, it was a pleasure, and people we never had anybody say no, really. I think that was like, they enjoyed it as a deviation from the normal Pro Tour routine. They held us in some amount of esteem, and were just happy to be on the show in whatever capacity. And, of course, we wrote stuff, to suit the performer. I mean, I was writing scripts with particular pro players in mind for who was going to play what part. We got them all on board ahead of time, and I knew them from the Pro Tour, so I would try to write in their voice so that once we're in the moment, they'll say, oh, I understand why you wanted me to be the person to say these lines. And that was, you take everybody's individual strengths, and it allows you to bring all kinds of different flavors to the table with your content.
After you guys have been doing this for a few years, the stakes then get raised through the roof with the possibility of this longer documentary series on Netflix. So take us through, I guess, your reaction when that news first dropped, and then the genesis of all of that.
Yeah, that was awesome. At that point, we were filming a documentary, like a feature-length documentary, and also producing Walking the Plains, the series, at the same time. At like every pro tournament, we were shooting both. So it was a ton of work. But the idea came from, now our executive producer at Wizards is a man named Greg Collins. And he's not somebody that maybe your average Magic player knows, was a household name, but he was the Pro Tour and event coverage manager. So he is like the lead producer on all of it that you saw when you were watching the Pro Tour or even Grand Prix coverage. He hired all the contractors. He managed our work. He's a really great guy. He gave us a great opportunity. Not enough people know his name. So, by this point, we had a few seasons of Walking the Plains under our belts. And Greg said, would you guys be interested in doing like a recap of the Pro Tour at the end of the year or something, so that, in January or something, we would put out a video that was a recap of the previous full year's worth of Pro Tour with interviews and some narration, and stuff like that. And Sean and I talked about it, and we were like, well, if we're going to do that, I mean, that's basically just a documentary. What if we actually did like a real documentary where it wasn't like, the goal wasn't necessarily to recap 1 year's worth of Pro Tour, but to feature the Pro Tour as a setting and characters within it, as an expose to both Magic itself, introduce an audience to Magic, and introduce an audience to what the Pro Tour was and some of its most compelling characters. So Greg liked that idea. We got enough of Wizards on board to get started with it. At the end of a year and a half or 2 years, we put it out. It was like 75 minutes long. And it went on Netflix, and, is for like 3 years. It's not on Netflix anymore, but it is on YouTube. You can look it up, Enter the Battlefield. And then that spawned a web series of the same name where we were just doing, documentary episodes, and we did a couple dozen of those. It was a peaceful parting with Wizards and, amongst ourselves professionally. Sean and I are still very close. I was interested in a career change anyway. I work in politics now. So, that was that. But, the documentary started out as Project Scorpion because I had a Sedge Scorpion, the 1/1, death touch, for a single green, from Theros. was just on my desk, and Greg said, we need a project name for this, and I was like, how about Project Scorpion? Boom. That's what it was for a long time until it became Enter the Battlefield.
That sounds like some, bungled CIA operation that, that the files get unsealed in 50 years and we all hear the inside story of. But this one a little more successful. But when the documentary finally comes out, this is one thing that really could introduce Magic and Magic players to a wider audience. And I don't think it was ever realistic to expect it to have some Queen's Gambit style effect for many reasons. But what was your sense of how it was received, and specifically how it was received by the people for whom this was their first introduction to this whole strange new subculture?
So I think for, casual players or non-Magic players, I do think it was received well. And it was also received well by the Magic community, who said lots of great things about the film. We were featuring Melissa DeTora, who was the first woman to top 8 a Pro Tour. And that was a big deal. And so giving her a lot of coverage was historic, in a way. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there was this bittersweet aspect to the release of the film that had a lot less to do with the film itself than the timing of when it was released. So there was, I believe it was Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad, that was in Madrid, Spain. And that was the weekend they were going to stream the film on Twitch, and then later have it on YouTube, and then a little bit later on Netflix. But that was the first time it would be shown to the public. And at this Pro Tour is when Wizards announced that they were going to cut pro player benefits, including benefits that slash appearance fees and all this other stuff, including benefits that players had already worked to earn. And it turned into a full-blown, scandal, I suppose. And it was, hashtag pay the pros on Twitter. And for a WotC produced, documentary about the Pro Tour, and we glorify the majesty of the Pro Tour and its competition and its stars in this film. It was very bad timing, in that suddenly WotC was this toxic company that fans and players alike were furious at over this announcement that they made during the Pro Tour that led to this pay the pros scandal. They eventually walked a lot of that back later. But it kind of really traumatized me personally. I basically had a breakdown over it. I didn't know that it was happening. I was as blindsided by it as any, fan was. And, all the nerves build up over the release of your documentary that you've been toiling over for a couple years. It was already as such an intensely emotional time for me that I kind of shut down a little bit, and in some ways that I regret, in ways that were not fair to Greg or Sean, but we muscled through that. It was an unfortunate timing of the release, but after the dust settled, yeah, people really liked it. And part of what our philosophy to making content was in general, and certainly with Walking the Plains, is that we wanted it to pass the test, with people's family, friends, and significant others. So, we all know what it's like as Magic players to be really into Magic, to play a lot of Magic, and then our parents or our spouse, or our brother or our roommates, have no idea what it is we're doing or why we like it. And that we wanted to make content for Magic players to show their Muggle friends what it was. And, so that like what I would call the significant other test, that was really big for us, both with Enter the Battlefield and Walking the Plains. So that, it helped us be well received in households, not just, with, individual players and whatnot. So, we tried to make it, a viewer friendly, casual friendly experience. We didn't get too deep into deck techs or, we didn't, speak Magic-ese, so to speak. I recapped the games. I would try to give like a broad overall sense of what happened in the games. And that's another way in which Sean was absolutely invaluable, because when we had started, he was not a Magic player. So I would start talking on camera, like I mentioned, triggers on the stack, or, just speaking in card names and converted mana costs and whatever. He would immediately stop me and say, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so I'd be like, oh, okay. So then I would reel it in.
And so looking back over now, it's been a decade since that tournament. What have you made with the unique perspective that only you really have been able to have of how the Pro Tour had changed during those turbulent times over the years? And then looking back on that one tournament that started it all, how do you look back on that now?
Man, it seems like a dream. It's kind of miraculous to look back at where I was in my life 10 years ago. I mean, it does seem like a dream. And so every once in a while I have to look at a photograph or, chat with somebody online or whatever, just to really remember that did happen, that I was dressed in a wizard robe with Mark Rosewater doing an impression of the Princess Bride. It was an extraordinary privilege. I felt like we were very lucky. And obviously, I never would have envisioned that any of it would have happened at that time in 2011 at Pro Tour Philly. I was just simply a fan at that point. But it was a really fun time to play Magic. It was a special time for the Pro Tour. The Pro Tour immediately exploded with coverage, starting with Pro Tour Dark Ascension in Honolulu, right after that. The game was exploding with popularity, it felt like the beginning, not just for me personally and our content, but it felt like the beginning of a new day for Magic.
And that was Nate Holt. You don't need to be told that man is a Shakespearean actor. You can quite easily visualize that yourself. So that's going to do it for part one. I'm going to take a break. We're going to let our production team here, Raphael and Justin and John and the rest of the unsung heroes who make this show possible, we'll let them take a break. And I'll be back, Ari will be back, and hopefully all of you will be back here for part two this week. Don't go anywhere.